post-traumatic growth engineering, turning adversity into lasting psychological strength. Chapter 1. The Myth of Resilience. Alone. The man who walked into my office on a Tuesday morning in March had already been told he was a success story. His name was Daniel. He was 41 years old. He had been a firefighter for 19 years. 16 months earlier, he had been the third man through a collapsing roof during a warehouse fire. 2 of his crew died. He survived with a broken clavicle, 3 cracked ribs, and a collection of images in his head that he described as a movie I didn't buy a ticket for. Daniel did everything right after that. He went to the required critical incident stress debriefings. He saw a therapist for 12 weekly sessions. He took the prescribed leave time. He returned to light duty, then full duty. He stopped waking up with nightmares after about 8 months. He stopped flinching at loud noises after 10. By the time he sat across from me, his department had cleared him for active service. His wife said she was proud of how hard he had worked. His captain told him he was back to 100%. Daniel did not feel like a success story. He felt like a piece of paper that had been crumpled into a ball and then carefully smoothed out again. The shape was roughly the same, but the creases remained. And something else had happened that no one seemed to be measuring. He was smaller than he used to be, not in his body, in his appetite for life. Before the fire, Daniel had been the kind of person who said yes to things. Yes to teaching the rookie class. Yes to coaching his daughter's soccer team. Yes to a last-minute camping trip with friends. After the fire, he said no to almost everything that was not required. He went to work. He came home. He sat on his couch and scrolled his phone until it was time to sleep. He was not depressed in the clinical sense. He was not anxious in the diagnostic sense. He was simply diminished. What troubled Daniel most was that he could not find a language for this diminishment. His therapist had given him scales to fill out: the Patient Health Questionnaire for Depression, the Generalized Anxiety Disorder Scale. He scored low on both. The therapist had smiled and said, "You are in remission." But remission from what? He had not had a disease, he had had an event. And the event was over. His body had healed. His mind had stabilized. So why did he feel like a piano that had been played so hard the strings went slack? This is the lie that resilience alone sells us. The lie is this: getting back to normal is victory. We have built an entire culture of recovery around that lie. In workplaces, we offer employee assistance programs that aim to return workers to baseline productivity. In therapy, we measure success by the reduction of symptoms. In self-help, we celebrate the story of someone who bounced back from hardship as if bouncing back were the highest possible achievement. But bouncing back to what? To the same life you had before? To the same limits, the same fears, the same smallness that was already there before the adversity struck. For many people, normal was never good enough to begin with. Consider Sarah. She was 28 when I met her, a high school teacher. 3 years earlier, she had been diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. She went through chemotherapy, radiation, and a double mastectomy. She came out the other side cancer-free. Her oncologist called it a complete response. Her family threw a party. Her friends told her she was so brave. Sarah did not feel brave. She felt hollow. Before cancer, Sarah had been a people-pleaser. She said yes to every committee. She stayed late to grade papers. She drove her elderly mother to appointments twice a week. She had never once asked herself what she actually wanted. Cancer had given her 8 months of forced stillness, and in that stillness, for the first time in her life, she had noticed something uncomfortable. She did not like most of the life she had built, but no one wanted to hear that. The narrative of cancer survivorship demanded gratitude, optimism, and a cheerful return to normal. When Sarah tried to tell her husband that she wanted to quit teaching and paint furniture for a living, He looked at her as if she had suggested they sell their house and join a cult. "You are supposed to be better now," he said, "not different." That sentence broke something in Sarah, not because it was cruel, because it was honest. Everyone around her wanted the old Sarah back. The convenient Sarah, the predictable Sarah, the Sarah who did not ask hard questions about meaning, purpose, or whether she had spent her entire adult life performing a version of herself that was not actually hers. Daniel and Sarah are not exceptions. They are the rule. Study after study on post-trauma outcomes shows a strange and frustrating pattern. Approximately 2/3 of people who experience significant adversity show resilience. They return to baseline functioning. Their symptoms fade. They go back to work. They laugh again. By every external measure, they are fine. But when researchers ask those same people a different set of questions, something troubling emerges. Do you feel more alive than before? Most say no. Do you feel a greater sense of purpose? Most say no. Do you feel stronger, deeper, or more authentically yourself? An overwhelming majority say no. They are not worse, but they are not better. They are just back. The psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun noticed this gap in the mid-90s. They had been studying bereaved parents, survivors of sexual assault, and people who had survived catastrophic illnesses. They expected to find mostly damage, and they did find damage, but they also found something they had not been trained to look for. A significant minority of their subjects reported not just recovery, but genuine improvement. They described feeling stronger, more connected to others, more appreciative of ordinary moments, more open to new possibilities, more spiritually alive. Tedeschi and Calhoun called this post-traumatic growth. The term was careful. It did not claim that trauma was good. It did not suggest that suffering should be sought out. It simply named an observable fact. Some people do not just survive adversity. They are transformed by it. And that transformation is measurable across 5 specific domains. First, a greater appreciation of life. Small things matter more. Sunlight on a wall, the sound of a child laughing, a meal eaten slowly. The person who has nearly died often stops taking ordinary beauty for granted. Second, closer and more authentic relationships. Adversity strips away pretense. When you have been seen at your worst, you stop performing. Many trauma survivors report that their friendships become fewer but deeper. They stop wasting time on people who do not truly see them. Third, an increased sense of personal strength. This is not the brittle confidence of someone who has never failed. It is a quieter, stranger kind of knowing. I survived that. I can survive almost anything. Not arrogance, just evidence. Fourth, the recognition of new possibilities. Before trauma, many people live on a kind of autopilot. They follow the script they were given. After trauma, the script is destroyed, and in the silence that follows, some people discover that they want to write a different story. They change careers. They end relationships that were never working. They start things they had been too afraid to start. Fifth, spiritual or existential deepening. This does not necessarily mean religion. It means asking larger questions. Why am I here? What matters? What do I actually believe? Many people go their whole lives without asking those questions seriously. Adversity forces the questions upon them, and for some, the answers change everything. These 5 domains are the raw materials of post-traumatic growth. They are not vague hopes or wishful thinking. They are measurable, observable, and repeatable. Researchers have confirmed them across dozens of studies, thousands of participants, and multiple cultures. The TEDS questionnaire, which measures PTG, has been translated into more than 20 languages. The phenomenon is real. But here is the problem that Tedeschi and Calhoun themselves were the first to admit. Post-traumatic growth is real, but it is not reliable. It happens for some people. It does not happen for most. And for decades, the field of trauma psychology treated this as a mystery. Some people just have the right personality, or the right support system, or the right amount of time. Growth was something you hoped for, prayed for, maybe even worked toward in a vague and unsystematic way. But it was not something you could engineer. This book disagrees with that passivity. Daniel did not need to be told that growth was possible. He needed a framework. He needed a sequence of steps. He needed to know what to do on Tuesday morning when the feeling of smallness sat down across from him like an unwanted guest who refused to leave. He needed protocols, not platitudes. He needed engineering, not encouragement. Because encouragement he had already received. His wife encouraged him. His captain encouraged him. His therapist encouraged him. Encouragement was not the problem. The problem was that no one had given him a systematic method for turning his suffering into something other than a scar. Engineering is the application of systematic methods to achieve reliable outcomes. A civil engineer does not hope the bridge stands. She calculates load, stress distribution, safety factors, and material tolerances. She builds in redundancy. She tests, she measures, she iterates. And then the bridge stands, not because of luck or good intentions, but because of design. What would it look like to apply that same mindset to psychological growth? The answer is the subject of every chapter that follows, but the first step is simpler and harder than any framework. The first step is to stop treating resilience as the finish line. Resilience is the floor. It is the minimum acceptable outcome. It is what happens when you do not completely fall apart. That is worth celebrating, but it is not the same as growing stronger. Daniel eventually learned this. It took him longer than it should have because no one around him was speaking the language of growth. Everyone spoke the language of recovery. Get back to normal. Feel better. Put it behind you. Move on. But Daniel could not move on. Not because he was weak, because he was honest. He knew that the person who had walked into that warehouse fire was not the same person who had walked out, and he did not want to pretend otherwise. He did not want to become the old Daniel. The old Daniel had been fine, but fine was not the same as strong. Fine was not the same as alive. When Daniel finally stopped trying to get back to who he was and started asking who he could become, everything shifted. Not quickly, not painlessly, but systematically. He started small, one question per day. What did he actually want? Not what his captain wanted, not what his wife wanted, not what the old Daniel would have wanted. What did this Daniel, the one with the creases and the movie he never bought a ticket for, actually want? The answer surprised him. He wanted to teach, not firefighting. He wanted to teach other first responders how to survive psychological collapse. He wanted to stand in front of a room of people who had seen terrible things and say, "I have been where you are, and here is what I learned." That was not a return to normal. That was a departure from normal. That was growth. Engineered, deliberate, hard-won growth. This book is for everyone who has felt like Daniel. You survived something, maybe a big thing, maybe 1,000 small things that added up to one heavy thing. You did the work, you went to the appointments, you said the affirmations, you bounced back, and yet you are not stronger, you are just back. And back does not feel like enough. You are right. It is not enough. Resilience is a gift. It keeps you alive. It keeps you functional. It keeps you from falling apart when falling apart would be completely reasonable. But resilience is not the destination. It is the platform. From that platform you can build something that was not there before. Not despite the adversity. Because of it. Not automatically, but systematically. The chapters that follow will give you the systems. This chapter has given you the permission. You do not have to be satisfied with normal. You do not have to pretend that bouncing back is the same as growing up. You can want more. You can build more. You can engineer a version of yourself that is not just recovered but redesigned. That is what post-traumatic growth engineering means. Not toxic positivity, not spiritual bypass, not pretending that trauma is a gift. Trauma is not a gift, it is an event. What you do with it after the event is over, that is the engineering, that is the choice. That is the difference between being crumpled paper and being a bridge. Chapter 2: The 5 Domains of Psychological Strength. The first time Elena told me her story, she cried for 40 minutes without stopping. She apologized 3 times during those 40 minutes. Each apology was the same. "I'm sorry, I thought I was done with this." Each time I told her there was nothing to apologize for. Each time she nodded, wiped her eyes, and then began crying again within 60 seconds. Elena was 34, a graphic designer. 3 years before we met, she had come home from work to find her husband of 9 years packing a suitcase. He told her he was leaving. He told her he had been seeing someone else for over a year. He told her he was not sorry. Then he walked out the door and did not look back. That was the first loss. The second loss came in the weeks that followed, slower and more confusing. Elena discovered that her husband had not just left her. He had systematically dismantled her confidence over nearly a decade. Small comments about her weight, dismissive remarks about her career, jokes that were not really jokes about how no one else would ever want her. She had absorbed these comments like water into a sponge. She had not even noticed they were there until he was gone, and the water began to drip back out. What remained was a woman who did not trust her own judgment, who flinched when someone paid her a compliment, who lay awake at night replaying every argument, every conversation, every moment she might have said or done something differently to keep him from leaving. She was not grieving her marriage. She was grieving herself, the self she had been before she learned to shrink. Elena had done the standard recovery work, therapy, support groups, a brief and unsatisfying experiment with an app that promised to rebuild her self-esteem in 30 days. She was functional. She went to work. She paid her bills. She saw friends on weekends. But she described her internal state as a room with the lights dimmed. Not dark, just dim. Just enough light to avoid bumping into furniture. Not enough light to read anything important. What Elena needed was not a return to who she had been. That person had been built for a marriage that no longer existed. What she needed was a map of where she could go. Not a vague promise of healing, a specific, measurable, actionable map of psychological strength. That map already exists. It has existed for nearly 30 years. And most people have never been shown it. The map is called the Post-Traumatic Growth Inventory. It was developed by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, in the mid-90s. The inventory asks people to rate how much they have changed after a significant adversity across 21 items. Those 21 items cluster into 5 domains, 5 specific areas where growth has been observed, measured, and replicated across thousands of people from dozens of cultures. These 5 domains are not metaphors. They are not spiritual wishes dressed up in scientific language. They are empirical categories. When researchers ask people who have survived trauma how they have changed, the answers fall into these 5 buckets with remarkable consistency. People do not say, "I feel better," in a general way. They say specific things. They say, "I appreciate the beauty of ordinary moments more than I used to." That is domain 1. They say, "I feel closer to the people who matter." That is domain 2. They say, "I trust myself to handle future hardships." That is domain 3. They say I am open to new directions in my life. That is domain 4. They say I have a stronger spiritual or philosophical understanding of what matters. That is domain 5. Let us walk through each domain slowly, not as a list to memorize, as a mirror to hold up to your own experience. Because one of the strange and wonderful things about the 5 domains is that people often discover they have already grown in ways they did not recognize as growth. They have been standing in a room full of furniture, complaining that the room is empty because no one told them what furniture looks like. Domain 1 is appreciation of life. This sounds simple. It is not. Appreciation of life, as measured by PTG researchers, is not the same as happiness or optimism or positive thinking. It is a specific shift in attention. Before adversity, most people move through ordinary life on autopilot. They eat without tasting. They walk without seeing. They listen without hearing. Adversity breaks autopilot. For a period of time, sometimes brief, sometimes agonizingly long, the person who has survived something terrible is forced to notice that ordinary life is not guaranteed. The sun rising, the sound of a child's voice, a meal shared with someone who did not leave. What makes this a domain of growth rather than a symptom of hypervigilance is the quality of attention. Hypervigilance says, danger could come at any moment, so I must watch everything. Appreciation says, beauty could be gone at any moment, so I will not waste it. The difference is subtle but real. One is driven by fear. The other is driven by love. Both involve noticing more. But the felt experience could not be more different. I worked with a man named James who had survived a heart attack at 52. Before the heart attack, he had been a senior vice president at a bank. He worked 60 hours a week. He ate at his desk. He had not taken a vacation in 4 years. After the heart attack, after the surgery, after the rehabilitation, he found himself standing in his backyard one morning, watching a squirrel bury a nut. He stood there for 11 minutes, he counted. He had never watched a squirrel before. He had certainly never watched one for 11 minutes. He described the experience to me as shameful and wonderful at the same time. Shameful because it had taken a near-death experience to show him what he had been missing. Wonderful because he was still alive to see it. That is appreciation of life, not gratitude journaling, not forced positivity. A genuine involuntary shift in what captures your attention. The ordinary becomes extraordinary because you have nearly lost it. Domain 2 is relating to others. Not all relationships. Specifically the relationships that survive the sieve of suffering. Adversity does 2 opposing things to human connection. First, it isolates. The person who has survived trauma often feels that no one can understand what they have been through. They stop reaching out. They stop explaining. They withdraw into a private world of experiences that seem untranslatable. This is real. This is common. This is not the whole story. The second thing adversity does is filter. Before trauma, many people maintain a wide circle of relationships based on convenience, habit, or social obligation. Colleagues you see at holiday parties, neighbors you wave to, friends from college you no longer actually like but keep in touch with out of inertia. After trauma, something shifts. The cost of maintaining relationships that do not truly nourish you becomes too high. You do not have the energy for small talk. You do not have the patience for people who do not see you. So you stop, quietly, not dramatically. You just stop reaching out. And something unexpected happens. The people who are only there for convenience fall away, and the people who remain are different. They are the ones who sat with you in the silence, who did not try to fix you, who brought groceries and left them on the porch without demanding a conversation. Those relationships deepen. They become forged, not just formed. This is what researchers call increased sense of closeness to others. But that phrase is too gentle. A better phrase is relational triage. You learn, often painfully, who actually belongs in your life. And the people who survive that triage become something closer to family than friendship. You would do anything for them, and you know with a certainty that feels almost physical that they would do anything for you. Elena discovered this when she stopped pretending to be fine. For years, she had maintained a cheerful facade with almost everyone in her life. After her husband left, she tried to maintain that facade for about 3 months. It nearly broke her. Then, on a Wednesday night, she called her oldest friend, a woman named Priya she had known since college, and said, "I am not okay. I have not been okay for a long time, and I cannot pretend anymore." Priya drove 2 hours to sit on Elena's couch and hold her hand while she said everything she had been holding in for 9 years. That night did not fix Elena, but it changed something. It showed her what a real relationship looked like. And once she had seen it, she could not unsee it. She started spending less time on people who made her perform, and more time on the small handful of people who let her be a mess. Her social circle shrank by more than half. Her sense of being known, truly known, expanded for the first time in her adult life. Domain 3 is personal strength. This is the one everyone wants, and the one everyone misunderstands. Personal strength in the PTG framework is not the absence of weakness. It is not stoicism. It is not the ability to endure without flinching. It is something stranger and more useful. It is the quiet knowledge that you have survived something that once would have destroyed you. That knowledge changes your relationship to future hardship, not because you are no longer afraid, because you have evidence. Hard, lived, irrefutable evidence that you are more than you thought you were. Before her cancer diagnosis, Sarah, the teacher from the first chapter, believed she could not handle conflict. She believed this so deeply that she had organized her entire life around avoiding it. She said yes when she meant no. She stayed in rooms she wanted to leave. She swallowed her own preferences so automatically that she sometimes forgot she had them. Cancer did not give her conflict skills, but it gave her something she had never had, proof of her own durability. She had survived chemotherapy. She had survived the loss of her breasts. She had survived the terror of wondering whether she would see another birthday. After that, the prospect of saying no to a committee meeting felt laughably small. Not easy, just small. The scale had shifted. What had once seemed like a mountain now looked like a speed bump. Not because the speed bump had changed, because she had climbed a mountain and knew in her bones the difference. That is personal strength, not bravado, not invincibility. A recalibrated sense of what you can bear. And once recalibrated, it rarely returns to its old setting. You cannot unknow that you survived. You cannot unknow that you are stronger than you thought. Domain 4 is new possibilities. This is the domain that scares people the most, because new possibilities often require leaving things behind. Before adversity, many people live inside a story about their lives that was written by someone else. Their parents, their culture, their younger self. They follow the script. Go to school, get the job, get married, buy the house, have the children, retire, die. The script is comfortable, the script is known. The script is also, for many people, suffocating. Adversity tears the script, sometimes literally. The job disappears, the marriage ends, the body changes in ways that make the old life impossible. This is loss, real loss, painful loss. But loss clears ground, and on cleared ground, new things can grow. The research on PTG shows that a significant number of trauma survivors report a shift in their life direction. They change careers, they start businesses, they end relationships that were not working, they move to new cities, they pursue creative projects they had abandoned. They do not do these things because they are reckless. They do them because the old reasons for staying put no longer feel compelling. Why stay in a job you hate? You might die. Why stay in a relationship that makes you small? You might die. Why wait until retirement to paint, to travel, to love, to try? You might not have retirement. You might only have now. This is not mania. It is not the dangerous impulsivity that sometimes follows trauma. It is a sober, clear-eyed assessment of what actually matters, and it often leads to lives that look nothing like the lives that came before, lives that are smaller in some ways and larger in others, lives that fit the person who is living them, not the person they were told to be. Domain 5 is spiritual or existential change. This is the domain that makes materialists uncomfortable and believers uncomfortable for opposite reasons. But it is too important to skip. Spiritual change in the PTG framework does not require God. It requires questions, big questions, questions most people spend their lives avoiding. Why are we here? What matters? What is a good life? What do I actually believe, not what was I taught to believe? Adversity forces these questions, not politely, violently. You cannot watch someone die without wondering what death means. You cannot nearly die yourself without wondering what life means. And the answers you find, if you find any, are rarely the answers you started with. Some people find their way to traditional religion. They return to the faith of their childhood or convert to a new one. Others move away from religion entirely. They discover that the beliefs they inherited no longer fit the reality they have lived. Still others land somewhere in between. They develop a private, unnameable sense of meaning that does not fit any category, but feels more real than anything they have ever known. What matters for growth is not the specific content of the belief. What matters is the asking, the willingness to sit with questions that have no easy answers, the courage to admit that you do not know, the humility to change your mind when the evidence of your own life contradicts what you were told. Elena found herself, in the second year after her divorce, walking to a Unitarian church on Sunday mornings. She was not sure why. She was not sure she believed in anything recognizable as God. But she needed silence. She needed ritual. She needed to sit in a room with other people who were also asking questions they could not answer. She never became a regular. She never joined. But she credited those Sunday mornings with saving her life, not because she found God, because she found permission to not have the answers. And that permission, which she had never given herself before, was a kind of freedom she had not known existed. These 5 domains are the raw materials of post-traumatic growth. They are not a checklist. You do not need all 5 to have grown. Most people experience growth in 2 or 3 domains. Some experience it in 1. That is enough. That is real. That counts. But here is what the research also shows. Growth does not happen automatically. It happens more often in people who actively work toward it. And it happens most reliably in people who have a framework for understanding what growth looks like, how to recognize it, and how to cultivate it. This is where engineering enters the picture. The 5 domains are the specification. They tell you what you are building. They tell you what success looks like. They give you a vocabulary for naming the changes you are trying to create. Without the domains, growth is a vague wish. I want to feel better. I want to be stronger. I want my life to matter. Beautiful sentiments, useless as engineering. With the domains, growth becomes a set of measurable outcomes. I want to increase my appreciation of ordinary moments from a 3 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10. I want to deepen 2 key relationships and release 3 that drain me. I want to be able to say with evidence that I have survived something that would have broken the old me. Those are specifications. Those can be engineered. Elena did not know about the 5 domains when she started her recovery. She stumbled through months of confusion, unsure what she was even aiming for. When I introduced her to the PTG framework, something shifted in her posture. She sat up straighter. She stopped apologizing for her tears. She said, "So there is a map. There has been a map this whole time." "Yes." There has been a map this whole time. Most people have never been shown it. The rest of this book is about how to use that map, not as inspiration, as instruction. The chapters that follow will take each domain and show you systematic methods for cultivating it. Methods that work whether you are a firefighter like Daniel, a teacher like Sarah, or a graphic designer like Elena. Methods that do not require years of therapy or a special personality or a lucky constellation of circumstances. Methods that you can learn, practice, and teach to others. But first, you need to know where you are starting. Before you can engineer growth, you need a baseline. You need to know which of the 5 domains are already present, which are absent, and which are present but fragile. The next chapter gives you the tool for that measurement. It is called the growth engineering loop, and it is the closest thing to an operating manual for psychological transformation that I have ever encountered. Before we turn to that tool, sit with the 5 domains for a moment. Ask yourself one question for each, not to judge yourself, to orient yourself. Where have I already grown without noticing? Where do I want to grow next? Those 2 questions are the beginning of everything that follows. Chapter 3. The Growth Engineering Loop. The first time I tried to teach someone the growth engineering loop, he threw his notebook across the room. His name was Marcus. He was a former Marine who had done 3 tours in Afghanistan and was now working as a security contractor. He had come to see me not because he wanted help, but because his fiancée had told him she would leave him if he did not talk to someone. Marcus did not believe in therapy. He did not believe in growth. He believed in mission, objective, execute. Those were the categories that made sense to him. Everything else was noise. I spent the first 2 sessions listening. Marcus told me about friends he had lost, about decisions he had made that he could not take back, about a version of himself that had died somewhere in Helmand province and been replaced by someone who startled at sudden noises, drank too much on weeknights, and had not laughed at anything genuinely funny in over 4 years. On the 3rd session, I made a mistake. I tried to explain the 5 domains of PTG. Marcus listened for about 10 minutes, his jaw tight, his arms crossed. Then he picked up his notebook and threw it against the wall. It hit with a satisfying smack and fell to the floor. "Doc," he said, "I don't need 5 nice-sounding categories. I need a sequence. I need to know what to do on Monday morning. I need a goddamn order of operations." He was right. The 5 domains tell you what growth looks like. They do not tell you how to get there. What Marcus needed, and what I have since learned that almost everyone needs, is a process. A repeatable, teachable, step-by-step method for turning adversity into strength. Not a philosophy, not a set of inspiring ideas. A loop. A cycle you can run again and again, each time getting clearer about where you are, where you want to go, and what stands in your way. That process is the growth engineering loop. It has 5 phases: sense, deconstruct, architect, test, integrate. Each phase flows into the next, and when you complete the loop, you do not end where you started. You end one level higher, stronger, clearer, more capable of handling the next wave of adversity that life will inevitably send your way. Let me walk you through each phase the way I eventually walked Marcus through them, slowly with examples, with the kind of specificity that would have saved him from throwing his notebook. Sense. The first phase of the loop is the one most people skip. They jump straight to action. They read a book, watch a video, or hear an inspiring podcast, and then try to implement someone else's solution to someone else's problem. That almost never works. Sensing means turning your attention to your actual present moment experience without immediately judging it or trying to change it. It means asking a simple set of questions. What do I feel in my body right now? What thoughts are passing through my mind? What do I actually need, not what do I think I should need? This sounds easy. It is not. Most of us have spent decades learning to ignore our internal experience. We distract ourselves with phones, with work, with alcohol, with television, with worry, with planning, with anything that keeps us from sitting alone in a room with our own minds. Sensing requires undoing that habit. Not all at once, for a few minutes at a time. For Marcus, sensing was almost impossible at first. He had been trained to override his internal experience. Pain was weakness leaving the body. Fear was a problem to be solved by more aggression. Sadness was not permitted. When I asked him what he felt in his chest, he said nothing for 3 weeks. Then, on the 4th week, he said heavy. That was the first true thing he had said about his internal state in years. Heavy. Not a diagnosis, not a story, just a sensation. That was sensing. The tools of sensing are simple. A 5-minute body scan, moving your attention from the top of your head to the tips of your toes, noticing without changing. A breath count, inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, repeated 10 times. A journaling prompt. Right now, without editing, I notice. The goal is not to feel better. The goal is to feel more accurately, to know what is actually happening inside you before you try to fix it. Deconstruct. Once you have sensed what is happening, the second phase asks you to take it apart. Deconstruction means breaking a complex experience into its component pieces. Most psychological suffering feels like a solid block. You cannot move it because it is too heavy and too unified. Deconstruction turns the block into a pile of bricks. Each brick you can examine separately. Each brick you can decide whether to keep, modify, or discard. Here is what deconstruction looks like in practice. You have a feeling. Let us say anxiety. Instead of saying, I am anxious, as if that were a single, unchangeable fact, you ask questions. What is the anxious thought? Is it something bad will happen? Is it I am not capable of handling this? Is it people are judging me? Different thoughts require different interventions. Anxious thoughts about danger require safety planning. Anxious thoughts about incompetence require skill building. Anxious thoughts about judgment require social recalibration. If you treat them all the same, you will use the wrong tool for the wrong job. Deconstruction also applies to behaviors. You have a habit you want to change. Drinking, scrolling, avoiding. Instead of attacking the habit directly, you ask what function it serves. What need does this behavior meet? For Marcus, drinking served 2 functions. It quieted the hypervigilance that made it impossible to relax, and it gave him permission to feel sad without admitting he was sad. Once he understood those functions, he could look for other behaviors that met the same needs without the same costs. Exercise for the hypervigilance, honest conversation for the sadness. The most powerful deconstruction tool is the 5 whys. You take a problem and ask why it exists. Then you ask why that answer is true. Then you ask why again, and again, and again. By the 5th why, you are usually no longer talking about the surface problem. You are talking about something deeper, a belief, a fear, a story you have been telling yourself for years. Marcus had a problem with anger. He would explode at small inconveniences. A slow driver, a misplaced tool, a comment he perceived as disrespectful. The first why do you explode? Because I am frustrated. Second why are you frustrated so easily? Because everything feels like a threat. Third why does everything feel like a threat? Because I learned that if I am not paying attention, people die. Fourth why does that lesson still apply in a grocery store? Because I have not learned to distinguish between a combat zone and a civilian context. Fifth, why? Why have you not learned that distinction? Because no one ever taught me. And because admitting I need to learn it feels like admitting I am broken. That fifth why was the real problem. Not the anger. The belief that needing help meant being broken. Once Marcus could see that belief, he could decide whether to keep it. He did not keep it. Architect. The third phase is where you move from understanding to design. Architecture means building a specific actionable plan for change, not a vague intention, not a resolution, a plan with a trigger, an action, and a measure of success. Most growth attempts fail at this phase. People know what they want to change. They have even understood why the problem exists. But they do not build a plan that accounts for the reality of their own psychology. They design plans for an ideal version of themselves who has unlimited willpower, perfect memory, and no competing priorities. Then they fail and conclude that growth is impossible. The architecture phase says, design for the person you actually are, not the person you wish you were. That means several things. First, start small. Ridiculously small. If you want to build a meditation habit, do not commit to 20 minutes a day. Commit to 1 minute a day, 1 minute you can do. 1 minute will feel so easy that you will not resist it. And once you have done 1 minute for 30 days, you can consider 2 minutes. Second, attach new behaviors to existing behaviors. Do not try to insert a new habit into a blank space in your day. Blank spaces do not exist. Attach the new habit to something you already do without thinking. After I brush my teeth, I will take 3 deep breaths. Before I check my phone in the morning, I will write 1 sentence about how I am feeling. When I walk through the door after work, I will take 60 seconds to transition before I speak to anyone. Third, build in feedback. How will you know if the plan is working? What is the measure? Not a subjective feeling, a specific, observable indicator. For Marcus, one measure was the number of times per week he raised his voice. He counted, objectively. His fiancée helped. For Elena, one measure was the number of social invitations she accepted, not the number she wanted to accept, the number she actually said yes to. The gap between intention and action was the thing she was trying to close. The architecture phase also requires designing the environment. Do not rely on willpower to resist temptation. Remove the temptation. Marcus stopped keeping alcohol in his house. Not because he did not trust himself, because he did not want to waste his willpower on resisting something that was easier to remove. That is engineering. Work with physics, not against it. Test, the fourth phase, is where the loop becomes real. Testing means implementing your plan and collecting data, not judging, not evaluating success or failure, just running the experiment and seeing what happens. The testing phase requires a specific mindset shift. You are not trying to prove that you are good or bad, strong or weak, improving or stagnant. You are trying to answer a simple question. What happens when I do this? That is all. Curiosity, not self-criticism. For 1 week, Marcus tried a new response to frustration. When he felt his anger rising, he would leave the room. Not forever. For 60 seconds. He would walk to the bathroom, splash water on his face, and ask himself one question. Am I responding to what is actually happening right now, or to something that happened years ago? The first time he tried it, he forgot. The second time he remembered but did not do it. The third time he did it and felt ridiculous. The fourth time he did it and noticed that his heart rate dropped from 120 beats per minute to 90. That was data, not a moral victory, just information. The information said, this intervention has a measurable effect. He kept testing. Testing requires a log, nothing fancy, a notebook, a notes app, a spreadsheet. Each day you write down what you tried, what happened, and what you learned. The log is not for anyone else. It is for you. It is the raw material of the final phase of the loop. Elena kept a log of her social experiments. 1 week she said yes to every invitation she received. The result was exhaustion and resentment. 1 week she said no to everything. The result was loneliness and a strange peace. 1 week she said yes only to invitations from people who had shown up for her during her divorce. The result was connection and energy. That was her answer, not a universal truth. Her truth, found through testing. Integrate. The final phase of the loop is the one most people forget. They try something new, it works, and then they go back to their old ways because they never integrated the change into their identity, their environment, or their long-term systems. Integration means taking what worked and making it permanent, not through willpower, through design. There are 3 levels of integration. First, behavioral integration. You turn the successful experiment into a habit. You repeat it until it becomes automatic. You build systems that support it. Marcus, after testing his 60-second pause for 6 weeks, found that it had become automatic. He no longer had to remind himself to leave the room. His body learned the new response. That is behavioral integration. Second, social integration. You tell people what you are doing and enlist their support. Marcus told his fiancée about the pause. She agreed to give him space when he walked away. She stopped following him to continue the argument. She learned to trust that he would come back. That is social integration. Your environment now supports the change instead of undermining it. Third, narrative integration. You update the story you tell about yourself. Marcus had told himself for years that he was a man who could not control his anger. That was his identity. After months of testing the pause, he had to revise that story. The new story was, I am a man who learned to pause. That is not a small change. That is a rewrite of the self. Narrative integration is the deepest level, and it is the level that makes the change permanent. The loop does not end. You run it again. You sense where you are now. You deconstruct what is happening. You architect a new experiment. You test it. You integrate what works. And then you start over. Each loop takes you higher. Not because you are fixing what is broken. Because you are building what was not there before. Marcus ran the loop for 14 months, not continuously, in cycles. He would spend 3 weeks on one problem, integrate the solution, then move to the next problem. Sometimes he ran the loop on small things, his impatience in traffic, his tendency to interrupt people. Sometimes he ran the loop on large things, his relationship with his father, his grief over his friends who had died, his fear of being soft. After 14 months, he was not a different person. He was the same person, upgraded. He still startled at loud noises. But the startle did not own him. He still drank occasionally, but he had not been drunk in over a year. He still felt anger, but he had not thrown anything, punched anything, or shouted at anyone in 8 months. His fiancée told me at their wedding that she almost did not marry him. She stayed because she saw him change. Not overnight. Loop by loop. He showed her his log once. She cried when she read it. Not because it was sad, because it was evidence. Page after page of a man teaching himself to be different. Not through magic, through engineering. The growth engineering loop is not a theory. It is a tool. It works for a former Marine with anger problems. It works for a graphic designer rebuilding her life after divorce. It works for a firefighter who thought he was fine but was actually shrinking. It works for you. The remaining chapters of this book are organized around the 5 phases of the loop. Each chapter gives you specific methods for one phase. By the end, you will have a complete toolkit for running the loop on any adversity, any stuck place, any area where you want to grow. But before we dive into those methods, you need to know one more thing. The loop only works if you start where you actually are, not where you wish you were, not where you think you should be, where you are. That is the subject of the next chapter, how to calibrate it, how to measure your current level of psychological strength without judgment or shame, and how to find the edge of your capacity, not too far beyond it, not too far behind it, right at the place where growth becomes possible. Chapter 4: The Stressor Strength Calibration Model. The woman who taught me about calibration was a rock climber named Tessa. I met her at a conference where I was speaking about post-traumatic growth. She came up to me afterward and said something I have never forgotten. "You talk about adversity like it's a weight you can choose, but sometimes the weight chooses you, and sometimes it's too heavy, and no amount of engineering fixes too heavy." Tessa knew what she was talking about. 3 years before we met, she had been climbing in Yosemite when a piece of her anchor failed. She fell 40 feet. She survived, but her spine did not. The fall left her with permanent nerve damage in her left leg. She walked with a cane. She would never climb again. Not the way she had climbed before. The grief of that loss was not the only thing she carried. She also carried a deep and corrosive anger at every self-help book, every well-meaning friend, every motivational speaker who had ever told her that adversity was an opportunity. She had read those books, she had tried to believe them, and she had ended up feeling worse because the books had promised her that if she just changed her mindset, she could turn her fall into growth. When that did not happen, she concluded that she was the problem. She was not positive enough, not grateful enough, not strong enough. That is the hidden danger of the growth movement. It is not that growth is impossible. It is that the promise of growth becomes another burden for people who are already struggling. You must grow from your trauma. If you do not grow, you have failed twice. First the trauma, then the growth. Tessa was not refusing to grow. She was refusing to pretend, and her refusal forced me to confront a question I had been avoiding. When is growth possible? When is it not? And how do you know the difference? The answer is calibration. Calibration in engineering means matching the input to the capacity of the system. Apply too little stress and nothing changes. The system remains exactly as it was. Apply too much stress and the system breaks. It does not grow, it fractures. Between those two extremes lies a narrow window. The window where stress leads to strengthening. Not too little, not too much, just right. This window has many names in different fields. In exercise science, it is called progressive overload. In psychology, it is called the zone of proximal development. In trauma therapy, it is called the window of tolerance. In the study of anti-fragility, it is called the optimal stress range. The names are different, the idea is the same. There is a sweet spot. And finding that sweet spot is the difference between growth and collapse. Let me be precise about what this window looks like. At the low end of stress, nothing happens. You stay comfortable. You stay the same. This is not a bad place to be. Comfort is good. Safety is good. But comfort does not produce growth. If you want to build psychological strength, you must leave comfort. Not forever, not far, but you must leave it. At the high end of stress, you are overwhelmed. Your nervous system floods with cortisol and adrenaline. Your cognitive processing narrows. You cannot think clearly. You cannot learn. You cannot integrate new information. You are in survival mode, and survival mode does not build strength. It builds scars. Somewhere between comfort and overwhelm lies the growth zone. In this zone, you are challenged but not destroyed. You feel discomfort but not terror. Your heart rate elevates, but you can still breathe. Your thoughts race, but you can still observe them. You are stretched. You are not snapped. Tessa's fall was not in the growth zone. It was far beyond it. A 40-foot fall onto granite is not a progressive overload. It is a catastrophic overload. The correct response to catastrophic overload is not growth. It is recovery, safety, stabilization, rest. The self-help books had asked Tessa to grow before she had even stopped bleeding. That was not wisdom. That was cruelty. Unintentional cruelty, but cruelty nonetheless. This chapter is not for people who are actively bleeding. If you are in the middle of a crisis, put this book down. Get help, get safety, get rest. The frameworks here will still be available when you are stable. Your first job is not growth. Your first job is survival. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. But if you are stable, if the acute phase has passed, if you are functional but stuck, then calibration becomes the most important skill you can learn. Because without calibration, you will do one of two things. You will stay in comfort, feel safe, and never grow. Or you will push too hard, overwhelm yourself, and retreat further into avoidance. Both paths lead to the same place: stagnation. The stressor strength calibration model gives you a systematic way to find your growth zone. It has 3 components. First, a method for measuring your current capacity. Second, a method for sizing stressors appropriately. Third, a method for tracking your changing capacity over time. Measuring current capacity. You cannot calibrate if you do not know your starting point. Most people have never measured their psychological capacity. They guess. They assume they are stronger or weaker than they actually are. And they design growth plans based on fantasy. To measure your current capacity, you need a stress test, not a physical stress test, a psychological one, a controlled, low-stakes exposure to a small dose of the kind of stress you eventually want to handle. Here is a simple stress test you can run today. Identify a situation that causes you mild to moderate discomfort. Not terror, not panic, just discomfort. Maybe it is speaking up in a meeting. Maybe it is having a difficult conversation you have been avoiding. Maybe it is sitting alone with your thoughts for 10 minutes without a phone. Choose something you are pretty sure you can do, even if it feels unpleasant. Then do it. For a set amount of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever feels like a stretch but not a break. During the stressor, track 3 things: your heart rate, if you have a way to measure it, your subjective distress on a scale of 1 to 10, and your ability to think clearly. Can you still reason? Can you still remember what you are trying to do? Can you still observe yourself having the experience? After the stressor, track your recovery. How long does it take for your heart rate to return to baseline? For your distress to drop below a 3? For your thinking to feel clear again? This test gives you 3 numbers: your stress threshold, the level of stress at which you begin to lose function; your recovery rate, how quickly your system returns to baseline; and your capacity ceiling, the maximum stress you can handle before you lose the ability to learn from the experience. With these numbers, you can begin to calibrate. Sizing stressors appropriately. Once you know your current capacity, you can design stressors that fit within your growth zone. The rule is simple: choose stressors that push you to about 70% of your maximum capacity. Not 50%, that is too easy. Not 90%, that is too hard. 70%, enough to feel challenging, not enough to feel overwhelming. 70% looks different for different people. For someone with high social anxiety, a 70% stressor might be making one comment in a group conversation. For someone with low social anxiety, a 70% stressor might be giving a 10-minute presentation to 100 people. The absolute level does not matter. The relative level does. Tessa, when she was ready to start building again, could not do what she had done before. Her 70% stressor was not climbing a wall. It was walking to the end of her driveway without her cane. That was the right size for where she was, small enough to be possible, large enough to feel like a victory when she did it. Over time, as her capacity grew, her stressors grew with it. The driveway became the corner became the block became the park. She never climbed again. That door was closed. But she found other doors. Doors she had not known existed, not because she pushed herself to grow from her fall, because she calibrated. She found the edge of her capacity and stayed there, not behind it, not far beyond it, right at it. Tracking changing capacity. The third component of the calibration model is tracking. Your capacity today is not your capacity tomorrow. It is not your capacity last week. Capacity fluctuates based on sleep, nutrition, social support, recent stressors, and 100 other variables. You cannot assume that what worked yesterday will work today. Tracking means checking in with yourself before every growth session. On a scale of 1 to 10, how resourced do you feel right now? If you are below a 5, do not do growth work. Do maintenance, rest, recover. Come back tomorrow. If you are above a 5, choose a stressor that matches your current state. A 7 out of 10 feels different on a day when you slept well than on a day when you did not. Adjust accordingly. This is the opposite of the toxic positivity approach. Toxic positivity says, push through, always push through, never give in to weakness. The calibration model says something more accurate. Push when pushing is useful, rest when rest is useful. The goal is not to be always growing. The goal is to grow over time, and you cannot grow over time if you burn out in the first month. Marcus, the former Marine, initially hated the calibration model. He wanted to push. That was all he knew how to do. Push through pain, push through fear, push through exhaustion. Pushing had kept him alive in combat. He assumed it would work for growth. It did not work for growth. It worked for burnout. He pushed too hard, overwhelmed himself, and spent 3 weeks avoiding everything. When he finally came back, he was worse than when he started. That was the lesson he needed. More is not always better. Right is better. And right requires calibration. He started using a simple tracking system. Each morning he rated his energy on a scale of 1 to 10. Each evening he rated whether the day's growth work had felt too easy, just right, or too hard. After 2 weeks he had data. He learned that his best growth happened on days when his morning energy was between 6 and 8. On days when it was below 5, growth work was useless. On days when it was above 8, he tended to overestimate his capacity and crash the next day. The data told him what his willpower could not. Calibration works. The stressor strength calibration model is not complicated, but it is difficult. It is difficult because it asks you to stop, to notice, to adjust, to honor your limits while gently expanding them. Most of us would rather push mindlessly or avoid entirely. Both are easier than calibration. Both produce less growth. Calibration is an engineering discipline. It treats your psychological system as a real system with real constraints. Those constraints are not weaknesses. They are facts. Gravity is a constraint on a bridge. A good engineer does not curse gravity. A good engineer designs with gravity. The bridge stands because the engineer respected the constraint. Your constraints are the same. Sleep, nutrition, social support, past trauma, current stress. These are not excuses. They are variables. A good growth engineer designs with them. Tessa eventually found a kind of peace. Not the peace of having grown from her fall. The peace of having stopped pretending. She did not become grateful for the fall. She did not become a better person because of the fall. She became a person who knew her limits and worked within them. And within those limits she found a life worth living. Different from the one she had planned. Smaller in some ways, larger in others. Real. That is the purpose of calibration, not to maximize growth at all costs, to make growth possible without breaking what is already fragile, to find the edge, to stay at the edge, to let the edge move outward over time, not because you forced it, but because you respected it. The next chapter builds on this foundation. Once you know your capacity and how to calibrate stressors, you are ready for the most powerful tool in the growth engineering toolkit, cognitive reappraisal engineering, the systematic redesign of the beliefs that keep you stuck. But before you turn that page, ask yourself one question. Not a question you answer with words, a question you answer with your body. Where is my edge today? Not where you wish it was, not where it was last year. Where is it today, right now, in this moment? That is your starting point. Everything else follows from there. Chapter 5, Cognitive Reappraisal Engineering. The most dangerous thought I ever had was a true one. I was 29 years old. My father had died 6 months earlier after a long illness. I had been his primary caregiver for the last year of his life. I had watched him shrink from a man who could lift a refrigerator to a man who could not lift a spoon. I had cleaned him, fed him, held his hand while he cried from pain. He refused to medicate because the medication made him too foggy to talk to me. After he died, I sat in my apartment and thought, I am not strong enough to survive this. The thought was true. I was not strong enough to survive it. The evidence was everywhere. I was not sleeping. I was not eating. I had stopped returning calls. I had stopped leaving my apartment. I had stopped doing the work I loved. I was not surviving. I was barely existing. But here is what I learned, slowly and painfully. The truth of a thought is not the only thing that matters. A thought can be true and also useless. A thought can be true and also destructive. A thought can be true and also not the whole truth. I am not strong enough to survive this was true. It was also incomplete. The complete truth was, I am not strong enough to survive this yet. And I do not have to be strong enough today. I only have to be strong enough for the next hour. And the hour after that. And the hour after that. And somewhere in the accumulation of hours, I might find that I have become strong enough after all. That second thought was also true. Both thoughts were true. But one led to collapse. The other led very slowly to the other side. This is the central insight of cognitive reappraisal engineering. Your thoughts about adversity are not passive reflections of reality. They are active constructions. And because they are constructions, they can be deconstructed and rebuilt. Not through positive thinking. Positive thinking is the enemy of real reappraisal. Positive thinking says, replace the true negative thought with a false positive thought. That does not work. Your brain knows the difference between reality and propaganda. Reappraisal says something harder and more honest. Keep the truth, expand it. Add more truth until the original truth shrinks from the whole story to just one part of the story. The architecture of belief. Every thought that causes you to suffer has a structure. You can learn to see that structure, and once you can see it, you can change it. The structure has 3 layers: the event, the interpretation, the belief. The event is what happened. Your father died, your spouse left, you lost your job. You were diagnosed with cancer. The event is Ke Guan Shu Shi. It cannot be changed. Anyone who tells you to change the event by changing your thinking is selling something that does not exist. The interpretation is the story you tell yourself about the event. This is where most cognitive work stops. You learn to notice that you are interpreting the event in a way that causes suffering. You learn to generate alternative interpretations. This is useful. It is not enough. The belief is the deeper layer. Beliefs are the rules your mind uses to generate interpretations. They are the operating system, not the app. If you only change interpretations, you will keep generating the same interpretations because the underlying belief has not changed. You have to go deeper. You have to find the belief and redesign it. Let me show you what this looks like. Event: my father died. Interpretation: I cannot handle this loss. Belief: I am someone who falls apart when things get hard. Do you see the difference? The interpretation is about the specific event. The belief is about you. It is a rule you carry with you from situation to situation. It is the thing that generates interpretations automatically, without your permission, every time something difficult happens. Most people spend their lives trying to change interpretations while leaving beliefs intact. They argue with individual thoughts. They generate counter-evidence. They try to talk themselves out of feeling bad about this specific loss, this specific failure, this specific rejection. But because the underlying belief has not changed, the next loss generates the same interpretation. They are playing whack-a-mole with their own mind. Cognitive reappraisal engineering goes after the belief. It treats beliefs as hypotheses, not facts. Hypotheses can be tested. Hypotheses can be revised. Hypotheses can be replaced. The Belief Audit Matrix. The first tool in the reappraisal engineer's kit is the Belief Audit Matrix. It is a simple 4-quadrant grid that helps you locate a belief, test it, and decide what to do with it. Here is how it works. You write down the belief that is causing you trouble. I am not strong enough. I am unlovable. I cannot trust anyone. The other shoe will always drop. You write it exactly as it appears in your mind, without editing, without making it more rational or polite. Then you ask 4 questions. First question, is this belief true? Not partially true, not true in some contexts. True, full stop, without exception. Most beliefs you hold about yourself will fail this test immediately. I am unlovable cannot be true because someone, somewhere, at some time has loved you, even if that love was imperfect, even if that love ended. The statement is too absolute to be true. That is useful information. A belief that is not entirely true does not have to be believed entirely. Second question, is this belief useful? Does holding this belief help you move toward the life you want? Does it give you energy? Does it open possibilities? Or does it close them? Many true beliefs are not useful. I might die someday is true. Dwelling on it constantly is not useful. Usefulness is a separate question from truth. A belief can be true and still worth discarding because it does not serve you. Third question, where did this belief come from? Not philosophically, specifically. Who taught you this belief? What experiences cemented it? At what age did you first believe it? The goal here is not blame. The goal is context. Once you see that a belief was installed at a particular time, in a particular circumstance, by a particular person or event, you can see that it is not eternal truth. It is historical artifact. Artifacts can be examined. Artifacts can be set aside. Fourth question, what would I have to believe instead to live the life I want? This is the generative question. It does not ask you to believe the new belief immediately. It asks you to imagine it, to try it on, to see what it feels like in your body, to notice whether your shoulders drop, your breath deepens, your chest opens. The body knows. The body is a lie detector. When you find a belief that makes your body relax, you have found something worth cultivating. Redesigning the belief. Once you have audited a belief, you move to redesign. Redesign does not mean erasing the old belief. Erasure is not possible. The old belief will still be there in your memory, available for recall. Redesign means building a new belief that is strong enough to compete with the old one. A belief that you can choose, not because it is more true, but because it is more useful, and at least as true. The most powerful redesign technique is called belief stacking. You do not replace the old belief. You stack a new belief on top of it. The old belief remains true at certain levels of analysis. The new belief is true at a higher level. You hold both. You choose which one to operate from. Here is an example from my own life after my father died. Old belief. I am not strong enough to survive this loss. Stacked belief. I am not strong enough to survive this loss, if survival means being unchanged by it. But if survival means being changed by it and continuing anyway, then I might be strong enough. Not yet, but eventually. Do you see what happened? The old belief was not denied, it was refined. A condition was added. A distinction was made. The new belief is more complex. It is also more accurate, and crucially, it opens a path forward. The old belief closed all paths. The new belief leaves one path open. A narrow path, a difficult path, but a path. Marcus used belief stacking on his anger. Old belief: I am a dangerous person who cannot control himself. Stacked belief: I am a person who learned to be dangerous in a context where danger was necessary. In that context, my lack of control kept me alive. In this context, my lack of control damages the people I love. I can learn a different response for this context without losing the capacity for danger if I ever need it again. That stacked belief allowed Marcus to change without shame. He was not bad. He was adapted to a situation that no longer existed. The adaptation had become maladaptive. That is not a moral failure, that is a calibration problem. Calibration can be adjusted. The rehearsal protocol. A redesigned belief is not enough. You have to rehearse it, not once, hundreds of times. You have to say it to yourself in the shower. You have to write it on index cards and tape them to your mirror. You have to whisper it when the old belief rises up with its familiar, seductive certainty. Rehearsal is not brainwashing, it is skill acquisition. Every skill requires repetition. Learning to serve a tennis ball requires thousands of repetitions. Learning to hold a new belief about yourself requires the same. The repetitions change the neural pathways. They do not erase the old pathways. They build new ones, stronger ones you can choose to use. The most effective rehearsal protocol I know is called the 5 sentences. You write 5 sentences that capture the new belief at different levels of abstraction. You read them every morning. You read them every night. You read them whenever the old belief asserts itself. Sentence 1 is the abstract principle. I am capable of more than my fear tells me. Sentence 2 is the specific application to your situation. I survived my father's death. I am still here. That is evidence. Sentence 3 is the behavioral instruction. When I feel myself collapsing, I will breathe 3 times before I decide what to do next. Sentence 4 is the compassion statement. It makes sense that I feel this way. Anyone would. I am not broken for struggling. Sentence 5 is the commitment. I will keep going. Not because I am strong, because stopping is not an option I am willing to take. Marcus wrote his 5 sentences on a card he kept in his wallet. He pulled it out every time he felt the anger rising. He read it silently. The whole thing took 30 seconds. 30 seconds of rehearsal before the old belief could lock in and take over. Those 30 seconds saved his relationship, possibly his life. The limits of reappraisal. Cognitive reappraisal engineering is powerful. It is not magic. It will not work if you are in the middle of an acute crisis. It will not work if you are sleep-deprived, malnourished, or actively traumatized. It will not work if you use it to bypass emotions that need to be felt. Reappraisal is not suppression. Suppression says, do not feel that. Reappraisal says, feel that, and then ask what it means, and then ask whether that meaning is the only possible meaning, and then ask what you want to do with the feeling once you have understood it. Reappraisal also has limits when the old belief is held by your entire environment. If everyone around you tells you that you are weak, that you are broken, that you will never recover, reappraisal becomes much harder. Not impossible, harder. The social scaffolding we will discuss in Chapter 7 is often necessary to make reappraisal stick. But, even with its limits, cognitive reappraisal engineering is the single most powerful tool for transforming the internal experience of adversity. It is the difference between being pushed around by your thoughts and learning to have a conversation with them. A conversation you do not always win, but a conversation you are no longer afraid to have. Elena, the graphic designer whose husband left her, spent months in the reappraisal process. Her old belief was simple and devastating. I am not enough. Not enough to keep a husband. Not enough to be loved. Not enough to matter. She audited that belief. Was it true? No, not in any absolute sense. She had friends who loved her. She had work that mattered to people. The belief was not true, it was just loud. Was it useful? No. It drained her energy. It made her smaller. It closed doors. Where did it come from? Her father, who had told her she would never amount to anything. Her husband, who had reinforced that message for 9 years. A childhood spent trying to earn love that should have been given freely. What would she have to believe instead? I am enough. Not because I have proved it, because enough is not something you prove. Enough is something you are. She wrote that sentence on her mirror. She read it every morning for 6 months. She did not believe it at first. She believed it a little after 3 months. She believed it most days after 6 months. She believed it completely on the day she turned down a job she did not want and accepted a job she was terrified to take. The old belief whispered in her ear the whole time, "You are not enough for this." She heard it, she acknowledged it, and she did the thing anyway. That is cognitive reappraisal engineering, not the absence of the old belief, the presence of a new belief strong enough to act on. Chapter 6. Narrative Architecture Rewriting Your Origin Story. The stories we tell about our lives are not documentaries. They are novels. We select which details to include and which to leave out. We impose a shape on events that, at the time, felt shapeless. We assign causes and effects. We choose a narrator. We choose a tone. We choose an ending. Most people do this unconsciously. They absorb the story their family told them. They adopt the story their culture offers. They inherit a plot that was written before they were born and never stop to ask whether it fits the life they have actually lived. Narrative architecture is the practice of taking control of that process, consciously, deliberately, with the same attention a novelist brings to a draft. This is not lying to yourself. This is not pretending that bad things did not happen. This is the opposite. This is looking directly at the bad things and asking a different set of questions. Not why did this happen to me? That question leads nowhere useful. But what does this event mean in the larger story of my life? And who do I become if I place this event at the center of my story versus at the edge? And what genre am I writing? The last question is the most important, because the genre of your story determines everything. The 3 narrative levers. Every life story has 3 levers you can pull: agency, coherence, redemption. Agency is the degree to which you are the subject of your own story rather than the object of things that happen to you. In a low-agency narrative, things just happen. You are acted upon. You are a passenger. In a high-agency narrative, you make choices, even constrained choices, even small choices, but choices that shape the direction of the story. Coherence is the degree to which your story makes sense, not in the sense of being predictable, in the sense of having internal logic. Events connect to other events. Causes have effects. The person you were at 20 makes sense as the predecessor to the person you are at 40. Low coherence narratives feel fragmented, chaotic, like a film that has been cut and reassembled randomly. High coherence narratives have a through line. You can trace the thread. Redemption is the degree to which your story moves from bad to good, from suffering to strength, from loss to meaning, from broken to whole. Redemption narratives are not the only valid narratives. There are also contamination narratives, where good is followed by bad, and the story ends worse than it began. There are stability narratives, where nothing much changes. Redemption is not morally superior to these other forms, but research is clear. People who tell redemption narratives about their lives have better mental health outcomes, not because they are lying. Because the act of constructing a redemption narrative changes the relationship between the storyteller and the story. These three levers are independent. You can have high agency and low coherence. You can have high coherence and low redemption. You can have any combination. The goal of narrative architecture is not to maximize all three. The goal is to examine where you currently stand on each lever and decide whether adjustments would serve you. The genre audit. Before you can rewrite your story, you need to know what story you are currently telling, not the story you wish you were telling, the story you actually tell yourself in the quiet moments, the story that comes out when you are tired or drunk or scared. Here is how to conduct a genre audit. Write down the headline of your life story, not the whole story, the headline. The sentence that captures the essence, the girl who was never loved, the man who lost everything, the one who could never get it right. Write it without editing. Let it be ugly if it is ugly. Then write down the headline you want. The woman who rebuilt, the one who learned to love late, the man who fell and stood up. This is your aspiration. It may feel false right now. That is fine. Then ask yourself what genre the first headline belongs to. Tragedy? Melodrama? Horror? Comedy? Some people tell their lives as comedies. They are often the most resilient. Humor is a form of distance. Distance is a form of freedom. Then ask what genre the second headline belongs to. Quest narrative, romance, rebirth. These are the genres of post-traumatic growth. They share a structure, separation, ordeal, return. The hero leaves the familiar world. She endures trials. She is transformed. She returns with something of value. This structure appears in every culture, every era, every form of storytelling. It is not a cliché. It is a shape that fits the human experience of transformation, because transformation actually has that shape. The question is not whether your life fits that shape. The question is whether you are willing to tell it that way. The 5-sentence rewrite protocol. The most practical tool in narrative architecture is the 5-sentence rewrite. It takes the raw material of your life and reshapes it into a redemption narrative with high agency and high coherence. You do not have to believe the new version completely. You just have to write it, and then read it, and then revise it, and then read it again. Here are the 5 sentences. Sentence 1. Before the adversity, I was a person who... This sentence establishes the baseline. Who were you before the thing that changed you? Be specific, not I was happy. That is too vague. I was a person who trusted easily and did not check references before lending money. The specificity matters. It gives you something to contrast with what came after. Sentence 2. Then adversity came in the form of name the event, directly, without euphemism. My husband left me for another woman. I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. My business failed and I lost everything. Do not soften it. The adversity is real. Naming it is not wallowing. It is giving the story an antagonist. Sentence 3. At first I responded by, this is the low point. The ineffective coping, the denial, the collapse. At first I responded by drinking alone and not answering my phone. At first I responded by pretending nothing had happened and working 80 hours a week. This sentence establishes that the protagonist did not handle it perfectly. No one does. The imperfection makes the story believable. Sentence 4. Then I learned that this is the turning point, the insight, the new belief, the small experiment that worked. Then I learned that I could survive being alone. Then I learned that asking for help was not weakness. Then I learned that the story I had been telling myself about my worth was not true. This sentence is the hinge. Without it, the story stays stuck. With it, the story can move. Sentence 5. Now I am a person who, this is the new baseline, the person you have become. Not the person you were before, a different person. Now I am a person who chooses relationships carefully and trusts slowly. Now I am a person who checks in with my body before I check in with my inbox. Now I am a person who knows that I can survive almost anything, not because I am special, but because I have evidence. The 5-sentence rewrite is not a one-time exercise. You write it, you set it aside, you come back, you revise. The adversity does not change. Your understanding of it changes. The sentences evolve. That is not inconsistency. That is growth. The story grows because you grew. The ghost of the old story. Rewriting your narrative does not kill the old story. The old story remains. It lives in your body. It whispers in moments of weakness. It waits for evidence that confirms its version of events and ignores evidence that contradicts it. The goal is not to execute the old story. The goal is to build a new story that is strong enough to compete, strong enough to be the one you reach for when you need to make sense of your life, strong enough to be the default, not the exception. This takes time. Research on narrative identity shows that lasting change happens over years, not weeks. The stories we tell about our lives are not casual. They are deep. They are rooted in memory, in emotion, in the very structure of how we organize experience. Changing them is possible. It is also slow. Do not be discouraged by the slowness. The slowness is not a sign that you are doing it wrong. The slowness is a sign that you are doing something real. Real change takes time. Anything that promises faster change is selling you a fantasy. Elena wrote her 5 sentences every week for a year. She kept them in a notebook. She could look back and see the evolution. The early sentences were tentative. Now I am a person who is trying to believe she is enough. The later sentences were declarative. Now I am a person who knows she is enough. The change was not in the events of her life. The change was in the story she told about those events. And that change was real. It showed up in her posture, in her voice, in the way she said no without apologizing. Daniel, the firefighter, wrote his 5 sentences 6 months after we started working together. His first attempt was wooden, mechanical. He was trying to write what he thought I wanted to hear. I asked him to throw it away and write something that would make him cry if he read it aloud. He came back the next week with a different version. Sentence 1. Before the fire, I was a person who thought he was invincible and never said no to anything. Sentence 2. Then the fire collapsed on me and 2 of my friends died and I lived. Sentence 3. At first, I responded by pretending I was fine and drinking until I could sleep. Sentence 4. Then I learned that pretending was killing me slower than the fire, but just as surely. Sentence 5. Now I am a person who knows he is not invincible and says no to things that do not matter, so he can say yes to the things that do. He did cry when he read it aloud. That was not a failure. That was the story becoming real, real enough to hurt, real enough to heal. Narrative as engineering. Narrative architecture is not self-help fluff. It is engineering. It takes the raw material of memory, which is messy and incomplete, and shaped by forces you do not control, and reshapes it into a structure that can bear weight. The structure does not have to be beautiful. It has to be functional. It has to hold the weight of your life without collapsing. A good narrative is not a true narrative. There is no such thing. All narratives are selections. All narratives are interpretations. All narratives leave things out. The question is not whether your narrative is true. The question is whether your narrative serves you. Does it open possibilities or close them? Does it give you agency or take it away? Does it help you move forward or keep you spinning in place? If your narrative does not serve you, you can change it. Not by denying what happened, by choosing a different lens, by pulling different levers, by deciding that the genre of your life is not tragedy, but quest, not horror, but rebirth. This is not easy. It is also not mysterious. It is a skill, and like any skill, it can be learned, practiced, and mastered. The next chapter takes the internal work of narrative and moves it outward. Because no matter how strong your internal story becomes, you cannot maintain it alone. You need social scaffolding. You need an environment that holds the new story while it is still fragile. You need people who see the person you are becoming, not just the person you were. Before you turn that page, write one sentence. Not 5, just one. The sentence that would be the title of the new story you want to live. Not the whole story, just the title. Write it down. Put it somewhere you can see it. Let it sit there quietly while you read the next chapter. It will not change your life by itself, but it is a beginning, and every engineered structure begins with a single line. Chapter 7. Social Scaffolding. The woman who taught me about social scaffolding was a neonatal intensive care nurse named Patricia. I met her at a workshop I was leading on post-traumatic growth. She did not say much during the first 2 days. She sat in the back, took careful note, and watched the other participants with the kind of attention that made me think she had seen things most people had not. On the 3rd day, during a break, she came up to me and said something I have never forgotten. "You keep talking about what people can do on their own, but I work in a unit where babies are dying every week. The nurses who survive that work do not survive because of their personal resilience. They survive because of the way they hold each other. If you write a book about growth and you do not write about that, you are writing a fantasy." She was right. I had been writing a fantasy. The first 6 chapters of this book focus on internal processes: sensing, deconstructing, architecting, testing, integrating, reappraising, rewriting. All of these are important. None of them is sufficient, because no human being grows in a vacuum. We grow in relationships. We grow in environments. We grow in systems that either support our growth or crush it. Social scaffolding is the name for the structures we build around ourselves to hold us while we grow. The metaphor comes from construction. When you are building a new structure, you erect temporary supports. Scaffolding. The scaffolding does not become part of the finished building. It holds the building while it is still too weak to hold itself. Once the building is strong enough, the scaffolding comes down. Psychological scaffolding works the same way. When you are trying to grow, you are vulnerable. The new beliefs are not yet automatic. The new behaviors are not yet habitual. The new story is not yet the default. In that vulnerable state, you need external supports. People who believe in you when you do not believe in yourself. Environments that make the desired behavior easier and the undesired behavior harder. Systems that catch you when you fall and help you get back up. Without scaffolding, most growth attempts fail. Not because the person is weak, because the person is unsupported. And unsupported growth is like building a house without scaffolding. It might stand for a while, but the first strong wind will knock it down. The 3 layers of social scaffolding. Social scaffolding has 3 layers: immediate, intermediate, systemic. The immediate layer is the people you interact with daily: your partner, your children, your close friends, your co-workers. These are the people who see you when you are not performing. They see you tired. They see you frustrated. They see you failing. Their responses to you in those moments either support your growth or undermine it. The intermediate layer is your community, your therapy group, your religious congregation, your sports team, your book club, your online forum. These are the people you see regularly but not daily. They provide a sense of belonging. They normalize your struggles. They remind you that you are not alone. The systemic layer is the culture you live in, the messages you absorb from media, from institutions, from the broader society, the stories that are told about people like you, the resources that are available to you, the policies that affect your life. You have less control over this layer, but you are not powerless against it. You can choose which media to consume. You can choose which institutions to participate in. You can influence the culture around you, even if you cannot control it. Most people focus only on the immediate layer. They try to get support from their partner or their best friend. That is important. It is not enough. A single person cannot provide all the scaffolding you need. That is too much weight for one pair of shoulders. You need all three layers, and you need to be intentional about building them. The growth pod. The most powerful form of immediate scaffolding I have seen is something I call the growth pod. A growth pod is a small group of people who commit to supporting each other's growth in a systematic way. 3 to 5 people, no more. Larger groups lose intimacy. Smaller groups lack diversity of perspective. A growth pod has 3 simple rules. First, no fixing. When someone brings a problem to the pod, the job of the other members is not to solve it. The job is to listen, to ask questions, and to reflect back what they hear. Fixing shuts down exploration. The person with the problem needs to find their own solution. The pod's role is to hold space for that process. Second, radical honesty. The pod is a no-bullshit zone. You do not say you are fine when you are not fine. You do not perform strength when you are feeling weak. You do not pretend to have grown when you are still stuck. The pod only works if everyone agrees to be honest about where they actually are. Third, reciprocal accountability. At the end of each meeting, every member states one specific action they will take before the next meeting. Something small, something measurable, something that moves them toward their growth goal. At the next meeting, they report whether they did it. No punishment for failure, but no hiding from it either. The accountability is in the reporting, not in the consequence. Patricia, the NICU nurse, started a growth pod with 3 of her colleagues after the workshop. They met for 1 hour every Thursday morning before their shift. They took turns sharing, no fixing, radical honesty, reciprocal accountability. Within 3 months, all 4 of them reported lower burnout scores. Within 6 months, 2 of them had made significant changes to their lives outside work. One left a marriage that had been dead for years. One went back to school for a degree she had been putting off for a decade. One started therapy for the first time. These were not weak people who needed rescuing. These were strong people who needed scaffolding. The pod provided it. Not because the pod members were therapists or experts, because they showed up. They listened. They told the truth. They held each other accountable. That was enough. The social environment as design problem. Most people treat their social environment as fate. They are born into a family. They fall into friendships. They accept the workplace culture they inherit. They never stop to ask whether these environments are designed to support growth or to prevent it. This is a mistake. Your social environment is not fate. It is a design problem. And like any design problem, it can be solved. The first step is an environmental audit. You make a list of everyone you interact with regularly. You put them into 3 categories: growth supporters, growth neutrals, growth blockers. Growth supporters are people who make you feel more capable, more alive, more like yourself. They listen without fixing. They believe in your potential. They celebrate your wins and sit with you in your losses. These people are gold. You need to spend more time with them. Growth neutrals are people who neither help nor harm. They are fine. They are not damaging. They are also not nourishing. These people are not a priority. You can keep them in your life without investing heavily in them. Growth blockers are people who make you feel smaller. They criticize, they dismiss, they undermine. They are threatened by your growth because your growth threatens the equilibrium of the relationship. These people are dangerous. You need to spend less time with them. In some cases, you need to remove them from your life entirely. The environmental audit sounds harsh. It is not. It is engineering. You cannot grow in a toxic environment any more than a plant can grow in poisoned soil. The plant is not weak for failing to grow. The soil is wrong. Change the soil. Marcus did an environmental audit 6 months into our work together. He identified 3 growth blockers in his life. 2 were friends from his Marine days who reinforced his anger and his drinking. They were not bad people, but they were bad for him. They needed him to stay broken because his brokenness validated their own. He stopped returning their calls. It was painful. It was also necessary. He identified 2 growth supporters, his fiancée, and a former commanding officer who had been through his own recovery and never judged Marcus for struggling. He started spending more time with both of them. He called the commanding officer every Sunday night, not to get advice, just to check in. To hear someone say, without irony, "I am glad you called." Within 3 months, Marcus's environment looked completely different. Fewer people, better people. He was not lonely. He was pruned. And pruning, as any gardener knows, is not violence against the plant. Pruning is how the plant directs its energy to the branches that bear fruit. Building your scaffolding. Social scaffolding does not appear by magic. You have to build it. Here is a practical sequence for doing that. First, identify your growth goal. Be specific. "I want to feel stronger" is not specific. "I want to be able to ask for help without shame" is specific. The goal determines what kind of scaffolding you need. Second, audit your existing environment. Who already supports this goal? Who undermines it? Who is neutral? Write their names down. Third, strengthen the supports. Tell your growth supporters what you are working on. Ask for specific help. "When I start to spiral, can you remind me of the evidence that I am not broken? Can you check in with me every Tuesday afternoon to see if I did the thing I said I would do?" People want to help. They often do not know how. Tell them. Fourth, weaken the blockers. This is harder. You may not be able to remove everyone who blocks your growth. If you cannot remove them, reduce their influence. Do not share your growth goals with them. Do not ask for their opinion. Do not spend time with them when you are vulnerable. Limit your exposure. Fifth, fill the gaps. What supports are missing? Do you need a growth pod? Do you need a therapist? Do you need a different workplace? Do you need to join a community of people who share your struggle? Identify the gaps. Then take one small action to fill one gap. Not all of them. One of them. Elena did this sequence 6 months after her divorce. She realized that most of her friends were growth neutrals. They were nice. They were not helpful. They did not know how to sit with her pain without trying to fix it. She needed growth supporters, people who had been through something similar and come out the other side. She found a support group for divorced women at a local community center. She almost did not go. She went. She hated the first meeting. She went back. She hated the second meeting less. By the 4th meeting, she had found 2 women who became her growth pod. They met for coffee every Saturday morning for a year. They did not use the language of scaffolding. They just showed up. They listened. They told the truth. They held each other accountable. That pod saved Elena. Not therapy, not self-help books, not positive thinking. 3 women in a coffee shop drinking bad coffee, telling each other the truth about how hard it was to rebuild a life after everything fell apart. The limits of scaffolding, social scaffolding, is not a panacea. It cannot fix everything. It cannot replace medical treatment. It cannot substitute for therapy when therapy is needed. It cannot make a toxic environment safe. It cannot force people to change who do not want to change. Scaffolding also has a dark side. The same social structures that support growth can also enforce stagnation, families that punish change, workplaces that reward compliance and punish authenticity, communities that demand conformity, a growth pod that becomes a complaint circle. All of these are forms of scaffolding. They are just scaffolding for the wrong thing. You have to be vigilant. Scaffolding is a tool. Tools can be used well or poorly. The question is not whether you have scaffolding. Everyone has scaffolding. The question is whether your scaffolding is holding up the building you actually want to build. If your social environment is holding you back, you have a choice. You can accept it, you can fight it, or you can leave. None of these choices is easy. All of them are real. Pretending you do not have a choice is the only wrong answer. Patricia, the NICU nurse, eventually left her unit, not because she could not handle the work, because she realized that no amount of scaffolding could make that work sustainable for her. The babies kept dying. The grief kept accumulating. Her growth pod helped her survive for 3 more years. Then she left. She became a nurse educator instead. She still misses the unit. She does not miss who she was becoming there. That is the ultimate purpose of social scaffolding. Not to keep you in a situation that is destroying you. To give you enough support to see clearly. To make a choice. To leave if leaving is what you need. To stay if staying is what you choose. To grow either way. The next chapter moves from the social environment to the smallest unit of all. The single action. The micro-commitment. The behavioral activation that happens in the space between feeling stuck and moving forward. Because no amount of scaffolding matters if you never take the first step. Before you turn that page, do one thing. Text one person, not the person you think you should text. The person who makes you feel more like yourself. Text them something honest. I am working on something hard. You do not need to do anything. I just wanted you to know. That is not a growth plan. That is a single brick. Bricks become walls. Walls become rooms. Rooms become homes. Chapter 8. Behavioral Activation Under Adversity. The most important conversation I ever had about change lasted less than 90 seconds. I was working with a man named David who had been stuck for years. He was 47, an architect, divorced, estranged from his teenage daughter, and drinking more than he wanted to admit. He had tried therapy 3 times. He had read dozens of books. He could explain his problems with impressive clarity. He knew why he was stuck. He just could not seem to unstuck himself. We had been meeting for 6 weeks. Every session, David told me what he had learned about himself. Every session, he had done nothing differently. He was collecting insights like stamps. Insight without action is not growth. It is intellectual entertainment. On the 7th week, I asked him a question that changed everything between us. David, what is the smallest possible action you could take today that would count as moving forward? He stared at me. What do you mean, smallest? I mean smallest, embarrassingly small, something so easy that you would be ashamed to call it progress, something that takes less than 60 seconds. What is that thing? He thought for a long time. Then he said, I could send my daughter a text message, just thinking of you. That would take 15 seconds. Good, do that, today. Then come back next week and tell me if you did it. He did it. He sent the text. His daughter did not reply. That was not the point. The point was that David had taken an action. A tiny action. An action so small it felt ridiculous to call it progress. But it was action. And action is the only thing that breaks the loop of stuckness. The next week he sent another text. The week after he sent a third. 3 weeks later his daughter replied. 1 word. Thanks, David cried when he told me. Not because of the word, because he had forgotten that he was capable of causing anything to happen in the world. He had been passive for so long that he had started to believe he was passive by nature. The text messages proved otherwise. He could act, he had acted, and the acting changed something inside him that no amount of insight ever had. This is the core of behavioral activation. Not feeling better so you can act. Acting so you can feel better, not waiting until you are motivated. Moving first, letting motivation follow. The inversion. Most people have the sequence backwards. They believe that change happens in the following order: insight, motivation, action, results. First, you understand the problem. Then you feel motivated to solve it. Then you take action. Then you get results. This sequence is wrong. It is not how human psychology works. The correct sequence is action, results. Motivation, insight, you act first. The action produces results, even small ones. The results create a sense of efficacy. The sense of efficacy generates motivation. And the motivation over time produces genuine insight. Insight is not the starting line. Insight is the finish line. It is what you get after you have done the work, not before. David had been waiting for motivation. He thought he needed to feel ready before he could act. He was waiting for a feeling that was never going to come. The feeling of readiness does not precede action. It follows action. You act. Then you feel ready to act again. The readiness is built brick by brick out of the actions themselves. This is why behavioral activation is so important for people who have experienced adversity. Adversity destroys agency. It teaches you that you are at the mercy of forces beyond your control. That lesson is not entirely wrong. Many forces are beyond your control, but the lesson generalizes. You start to believe that nothing is within your control. That belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You stop acting, and because you stop acting, nothing changes. And because nothing changes, you believe even more strongly that you cannot change anything. The only way out of that spiral is to act, not grandly, not perfectly, not even competently. Just act. Take one small step, then another, then another. The 2% rule. The 2% rule is a simple commitment. Every day you do something that moves you 2% closer to where you want to be. Not 10%, not 50%, 2%. 2% is almost nothing. That is the point. 2% is so small that you cannot legitimately say you do not have the energy, the time, or the willpower. 2% is available to you even on your worst day, even when you are exhausted, even when you are grieving, even when you are certain that nothing will ever change. What does 2% look like in practice? If your goal is to rebuild your social life, 2% is sending one text message. Not calling, not planning a dinner party. One text. If your goal is to get back to exercise, 2% is putting on your shoes. Not going to the gym, not running a mile. Putting on your shoes. If your goal is to address your drinking, 2% is waiting 5 minutes before your first drink. Not quitting, not cutting back dramatically. Waiting 5 minutes. If your goal is to reconnect with your estranged child, 2% is writing a sentence in a journal about what you would say to them if you could. Not sending it, not calling, writing one sentence. These actions are almost laughably small. That is the point. They are small enough that you cannot fail at them. And the experience of not failing is more important than the content of the action. Every time you complete a 2% action, you send a message to your brain. I am someone who acts. I am someone who moves forward. I am someone who does not wait for motivation. Those messages accumulate. They become a new identity. The identity becomes self-reinforcing. You act because you are someone who acts, not because you feel like it, because it is who you are. David started with the 2% rule after our conversation about the text message. He made a list of tiny actions he could take each day. Day 1, text his daughter. Day 2, text his daughter again. Day 3, text his daughter and also make his bed. Day 4, text his daughter, make his bed, and eat breakfast before noon. The actions were trivial. The accumulation was not. After 30 days, David had sent 30 text messages, made his bed 28 times, and eaten breakfast before noon on 22 days. He was not a different person, but he was different. He was acting, and acting had changed something in his posture, in his voice, in the way he sat in my office. He was no longer waiting to be saved. He was saving himself 2% at a time. Micro-commitments. The 2% rule is about what you do for yourself. Micro-commitments are about what you do for others. They are small promises you make to other people. Promises that are easy to keep. Promises that create a web of accountability that catches you when you want to retreat into passivity. A micro-commitment has 3 characteristics. It is specific, it is time-bound, it is witnessed. Specific means you can say exactly what you are going to do, not, I will work on my anger. That is vague. Tonight at dinner, when I feel myself getting frustrated, I will take 3 breaths before I speak. That is specific. Time-bound means there is a deadline. By Friday at 5 p.m., not someday, not when I get around to it. A real deadline on a real calendar. Witnessed means someone else knows about the commitment. You tell someone. You write it down where someone else can see it. You post it in a group chat. The witness does not need to enforce the commitment. The witness just needs to know. The knowledge that someone else knows changes everything. It transforms a private intention into a public promise. Marcus used micro-commitments to address his anger. Every Sunday night, he told his fiancée 3 specific things he would do differently the following week. Not big things, micro things. When I feel my voice getting loud, I will stop talking and walk to the kitchen. If I want to drink, I will call my sponsor first. If I start to spiral about work, I will name 3 things I can see in front of me. His fiancée did not monitor him. She did not ask him whether he had kept his commitments. She just listened. The act of saying the commitments aloud was enough. The witnessing changed the weight of the promises. They were no longer just thoughts in his head. They were words spoken to another person. That made them real. The activation log. Behavioral activation works best when you track it. Not because tracking is morally superior, because tracking gives you data, and data breaks the spell of feelings. When you are stuck, your feelings tell you a story. Nothing is changing. I am not making progress. This is pointless. Those feelings are real. They are also not accurate. The way to discover their inaccuracy is to keep a log. A simple record of what you actually did, not how you felt about it. The activation log has 3 columns: date, action, completion, yes/no. That is it. No column for how you felt, no column for whether the action was hard, no column for whether it worked, just the action and whether you did it. The log serves 2 purposes. First, it gives you evidence that you are acting. On days when you feel like you are doing nothing, the log shows you the truth. You sent the text, you made the bed, you took the 3 breaths. That is not nothing, that is something. The something accumulates. Second, the log reveals patterns. You may discover that you always fail on Tuesdays. That is useful information. You can design around Tuesday. You may discover that you always succeed in the morning and fail in the evening. That is useful information. You can move your actions to the morning. The log does not judge you. The log teaches you. Elena kept an activation log for 3 months. She was trying to rebuild her social life after her divorce. Her action was simple. Every day she would reach out to one person. A text, an email, a phone call, something small. The log showed her something she had not noticed. She reached out consistently on weekdays. On weekends, she almost never did. The pattern was clear. Weekends were harder. She was not failing because she was weak. She was failing because the structure of her week changed. On weekdays, work gave her momentum. On weekends, she had no momentum and no structure. Once she saw the pattern, she changed her approach. She stopped trying to reach out on weekends. Instead, she did 2 actions on Friday. One for Friday, one for Saturday. She front-loaded the weekend. The log showed that this worked. Her completion rate went from 60% to 90%, not because she tried harder, because she designed around her own pattern. That is engineering, not willpower, design. The 5-second rule for action. The biggest enemy of action is not laziness. It is the gap between thought and action. You think about doing something. Then you hesitate. In the hesitation, your brain generates reasons not to act. It is too hard. It will not work. You are too tired. Do it later. The hesitation is where action goes to die. The 5-second rule is a simple intervention. When you have the impulse to act on a growth goal, you count backward from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then you move. You do not give yourself time to generate objections. You do not negotiate. You just move. The counting interrupts the hesitation loop. It gives you a clean window between impulse and action. The window is small. 5 seconds is not enough time for your brain to talk you out of anything. That is the point. You act before your fear can catch up with you. David used the 5-second rule to send his daily text to his daughter. Every morning he felt the impulse. Then he hesitated. What if she does not want to hear from me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if she shows this to her friends and they laugh at me? The hesitation lasted 10 seconds. Then he put the phone down, and the text did not get sent. When he started using the 5-second rule, he changed the sequence. He would pick up his phone. He would count backward from 5. On 1, he would type the message and hit send before his brain could catch up. The messages were not perfect. Sometimes they were awkward. Sometimes they were too long. Sometimes they were too short. They did not need to be perfect. They just needed to be sent. The 5-second rule works because it outsources the decision to a mechanical process. You are not deciding whether to act. You have already decided. The rule is the decision. You are just executing. When action is not enough, behavioral activation is powerful. It is not omnipotent. There are times when action is not the answer. When you are in the middle of a trauma response, when you are actively suicidal, when you are so depressed that getting out of bed is a 50% action rather than a 2% action. In those moments, behavioral activation is not the right tool. Rest is the right tool. Safety is the right tool. Professional help is the right tool. The 2% rule assumes you have some capacity to act. If you have 0 capacity, do not apply the 2% rule. Apply the 1% rule, or the 0.5% rule, or the rule that says, today my only action is to stay alive. That is enough. That counts. Tomorrow you can try for something more. David was not at 0. He was functional. He was just stuck. Behavioral activation unstuck him. It did not solve all his problems. He and his daughter did not reconcile overnight. His drinking did not disappear. His loneliness did not vanish. But the action created momentum. And momentum is the precursor to everything else. 6 months after he sent that first text, David and his daughter had a phone conversation that lasted 45 minutes. It was not a happy conversation. They argued. They cried. They said things that could not be unsaid. But they talked. And talking was not possible before David started acting. The action did not create the reconciliation. The action created the conditions in which reconciliation became possible. That is all behavioral activation promises. Not transformation, conditions, soil. The seed still has to grow. But the seed cannot grow in concrete. Action breaks the concrete. Action creates soil. What grows from that soil is not guaranteed, but nothing grows without it. The next chapter takes the small actions of behavioral activation and scales them into a full protocol. 12 weeks, week by week, a systematic plan for turning the principles of this book into a daily practice. Not a vague intention, a schedule, a blueprint, an engineering plan for the most important construction project you will ever undertake. Before you turn that page, do one thing. Identify your 2% action for today. Not tomorrow. Today, something so small that you would be embarrassed to call it progress. Write it down, then do it. Then cross it off. That crossing off is not trivial. That crossing off is the first brick of a new life. Chapter 9, the 12-week Growth Engineering Protocol. By the time you reach this chapter, you have absorbed 7 frameworks: the growth engineering loop, the 5 domains, the calibration model, cognitive reappraisal, narrative architecture, social scaffolding, behavioral activation. Each of these is a tool. Tools are useless without a project. This chapter is the project. The 12-week Growth Engineering Protocol is a complete week-by-week plan for turning adversity into lasting psychological strength. It is not a suggestion. It is not a menu of options. It is a protocol. You follow it. You do not skip weeks because you do not feel like it. You do not modify it because you think you know better. You run the protocol as written. Then, after 12 weeks, you evaluate. Then you run it again, modified based on what you learned. Protocols exist for a reason. They remove the friction of constant decision-making. When you are trying to grow, you do not need more decisions. You need fewer decisions. You need a clear path. You need to know what Tuesday looks like before Tuesday arrives. The protocol gives you that. A note before we begin. This protocol assumes you are stable. It assumes you are not in acute crisis. It assumes you have basic needs met. It assumes you have some access to social scaffolding, even if imperfect. If these assumptions are false, do not start the protocol. Get stable first. The protocol will be here when you return. Week 1. Baseline and orientation. The first week has only one goal: know where you are. Day 1, you complete the post-traumatic growth inventory adapted for engineering. You will find it in Appendix B. It takes 20 minutes. It gives you a score across the 5 domains. That score is your baseline. It is not a judgment. It is a starting point. Days 2 through 7, you keep a simple log. Each evening, you answer 3 questions. What did I feel today? What did I avoid today? What did I do today that counts as moving forward, no matter how small? You do not try to change anything in week 1. You observe, you collect data. You resist the urge to fix. The urge to fix is the enemy of accurate seeing. You cannot calibrate if you cannot see. By the end of week 1, you will have 7 days of data. You will notice patterns. You will see which days are harder. You will see what triggers your avoidance. You will see what you are already doing right. Do not dismiss what you are already doing right. That is scaffolding you built before you had a protocol. Honor it. Week 2. Calibration Week 2 is about finding your edge. Each day you run a small stress test. You identify a situation that causes mild to moderate discomfort. You enter it deliberately. You stay for a set amount of time. You track your response. The stress tests in week 2 are intentionally small. If you have social anxiety, your stress test might be making eye contact with the cashier. If you have work avoidance, your stress test might be opening your email and reading the first 3 messages without responding. If you have grief, your stress test might be looking at a photograph for 30 seconds. After each stress test, you record 3 numbers. Your peak distress on a scale of 1 to 10. Your recovery time in minutes, and whether you lost the ability to think clearly at any point. By the end of week 2, You will have a clear picture of your current capacity. You will know what 70% of your maximum feels like. You will know how long recovery takes. You will know which types of stress are harder for you than others. This is not weakness. This is data. Data is power. Week 3. The belief audit. Week 3 is cognitive. You have done the sensing. You have done the calibrating. Now you go after the beliefs that keep you stuck. Each day you identify one belief that limits you. You write it down exactly as it appears in your mind. I am not strong enough. I cannot trust anyone. I will never get over this. People like me do not succeed. Then you run that belief through the belief audit matrix from Chapter 5. Is it true? Is it useful? Where did it come from? What would I have to believe instead? You do not need to change the belief in Week 3. You only need to see it, to hold it up to the light, to notice that it is not a fact. It is a thought you have been treating as a fact. That separation is the first step toward freedom. By the end of Week 3, you will have audited 7 beliefs. Some will crumble under examination, some will hold. The ones that hold are not necessarily true, they are just deeply rooted. They will require more work. That is fine. Week 3 is not about eradication, it is about identification. Week 4, Belief Redesign. Week 4 is where you build new beliefs to compete with the old ones. You take the 7 beliefs from Week 3. For each one, you write a stacked belief, a belief that includes the truth of the old belief and adds more truth, a belief that opens a path forward. Old belief. I am not strong enough to handle this. Stacked belief. I am not strong enough to handle this if handling it means not being changed by it. But if handling it means being changed and continuing anyway, then I might be strong enough. Not yet, but eventually. You write each stacked belief on an index card. You read the cards every morning. You read them every night. You read them whenever the old belief rises up with its familiar certainty. You also begin the 5 sentences from Chapter 6. You write your 5 sentences. You revise them until they feel true enough. Not completely true. True enough to act on. True enough to say aloud without gagging. By the end of Week 4, you have new beliefs. They are fragile. They are not automatic. They require rehearsal. That is what the rest of the protocol is for. Week 5, the 5-sentence rewrite. Week 5 is narrative. You take the raw material of your life and you reshape it. You write the 5-sentence rewrite from Chapter 6. You do it every day for 7 days. Each day you revise it. Each day it changes. The events do not change. Your understanding of them changes. Your emphasis changes. Your voice changes. Monday. Before the adversity, I was a person who... Tuesday. Then adversity came in the form of Wednesday. At first I responded by Thursday. Then I learned that Friday. Now I am a person who Saturday. You read all 5 sentences aloud, to yourself, to a mirror, to a growth pod member if you have one. Sunday. You write the whole thing from memory. Not because memory is accurate, because what you remember is what matters. The rewrite is not a historical document. It is a living story. What you remember is the story you are actually telling. That is the story you can change. By the end of Week 5, you have a new origin story. It is not finished. It will never be finished. But it is started. And starting is the difference between a story that owns you and a story you own. Week 6, Social Scaffolding Audit. Week 6 turns outward. You cannot grow alone. Week 6 is about building the environment that will hold your growth. Day 1, you complete the environmental audit from Chapter 7. You list everyone you interact with regularly. You sort them into growth supporters, growth neutrals, and growth blockers. Days 2 through 5, you take one action each day. Day 2, You spend extra time with a growth supporter. Day 3. You reduce time with a growth blocker. Day 4. You ask a growth supporter for specific help. Day 5. You identify a gap in your scaffolding and take one small step to fill it. Day 6. You launch your growth pod. You identify 3 to 5 people who might be willing to commit to the 3 rules. No fixing. Radical honesty. Reciprocal accountability. You invite them. Some will say, no, that is fine, you need 2. 2 is enough. Day 7, you hold the first growth pod meeting. It takes 30 minutes. Each person shares where they are. Each person states one action they will take before the next meeting. No fixing. Just listening. Just witnessing. Just accountability. By the end of week 6, you are no longer growing alone. You are growing in a system. The system is imperfect. It will need maintenance. But it exists. That is the difference between trying and engineering. Week 7, the 2% rule. Week 7 is about action, small action, embarrassingly small action. You identify your 2% actions for each of the 5 domains. 1 action for appreciation of life, 1 for relating to others, 1 for personal strength, 1 for new possibilities, 1 for spiritual or existential deepening. Each action takes less than 60 seconds. Each action is so small that you cannot fail at it. Appreciation of life. Notice one beautiful thing and name it aloud. Relating to others. Send one text that says thinking of you. Personal strength. Stand up straight for 3 breaths. New possibilities. Write down one thing you would do if you were not afraid. Spiritual deepening. Ask yourself one unanswerable question before bed. You do these 5 actions every day. You log them. You check them off. The checking off is not trivial. The checking off is the accumulation of evidence that you are someone who acts. By the end of week 7, you have completed 35 actions, 35 pieces of evidence, 35 bricks. The wall is not yet built, but the bricks are real. Week 8. Micro-commitments. Week 8 extends the 2% rule into the social realm. You make micro-commitments to your growth pod. Each day you make 1 micro-commitment. It must be specific, time-bound, and witnessed. You tell your pod. You write it in a shared document. You create accountability. Monday. Tonight at dinner I will take 3 breaths before I speak when I feel frustrated. Tuesday. Before I go to bed, I will write 1 sentence about what went well today. Wednesday. When I wake up tomorrow, I will drink a glass of water before I check my phone. Thursday. If I feel the urge to drink, I will wait 10 minutes before I decide. Friday. I will call my sister. I will not fix her problems. I will just listen. Saturday. I will go outside for 5 minutes. I will not bring my phone. Sunday. I will tell my pod whether I kept my commitments this week. No excuses, no justifications, just report. The micro-commitments transform the abstract goal of growth into a concrete, daily practice. They are not heroic. They are not transformative in isolation. But they accumulate. And accumulation is the only path to lasting change. By the end of week 8, you have made 7 micro-commitments. You have kept most of them. You have learned which types of commitments are easy for you and which are hard. You have data. Data drives the next cycle. Week 9, the activation. Log week 9 is about tracking. You have been logging throughout the protocol. Now you get systematic. You create an activation log with 3 columns: date, action, completion. Your actions in week 9 are the 5 2% actions from week 7, plus the micro-commitments that worked best in week 8. You are not adding new actions. You are consolidating. You are turning actions into habits. Each evening you fill out the log. You do not judge the entries. You do not celebrate or punish. You just record. The log is a mirror. It shows you what you actually did, not what you intended to do. The gap between intention and action is where the work lives. At the end of week 9, you review the log. You look for patterns. Which days are hardest? Which actions do you consistently skip? What is getting in the way? The answers are not excuses. The answers are design problems. You solve design problems with design, not with shame. Week 10, stressor progression. Week 10 returns to calibration. You have been doing small stressors for 9 weeks. Your capacity has grown. It is time to test that growth. You identify stressors that are slightly larger than the ones you used in week 2. Not dramatically larger, 10% larger, 20% larger. You are progressive overloading, not shock loading. If your week 2 stress test was making eye contact with a cashier, your week 10 stress test might be asking the cashier how their day is going. If your week 2 stress test was opening your email, your week 10 stress test might be replying to one email. If your week 2 stress test was looking at a photograph for 30 seconds, your week 10 stress test might be looking at the photograph for 2 minutes. You run one stress test each day. You track your peak distress, your recovery time, and your cognitive clarity. You compare the numbers to week 2. You are looking for improvement, not perfection. Improvement. If your numbers are worse than week 2, you do not push. You rest. You recalibrate. You ask what has changed. Have you been sleeping poorly? Is there a new stressor in your life? Are you getting sick? The protocol is not a test you pass or fail. The protocol is a tool for learning. The learning is the point. Week 11, narrative integration. Week 11 is the return of narrative. You have been living with your new story for 6 weeks. It is time to revise it. You pull out your 5-sentence rewrite from week 5. You read it. You notice what has changed. You notice what has stayed the same. You notice what feels false now that did not feel false then. You rewrite the 5 sentences, not from memory, from where you are now. The events are the same. The interpretation has shifted. The story has grown because you have grown. You read the new version aloud, to yourself, to your growth pod, to anyone who will listen. The act of speaking the story aloud changes the relationship between the storyteller and the story. The story becomes less precious, less fixed, more like a draft that can be revised again. By the end of week 11, you have 2 versions of your origin story, the one from week 5 and the one from week 11. The differences between them are not evidence that you were lying before. The differences are evidence that you have changed. That is not inconsistency. That is growth. Week 12, integration and next cycle. The final week of the protocol is not the end. It is a pause, a breath, a moment to look back before you look forward. You retake the post-traumatic growth inventory from Appendix B. You compare your scores to week 1. The comparison is not a judgment. It is data. Some domains will have improved, some will not. Some will have improved in ways you did not expect. Some will have stayed the same despite your efforts. You write a summary of what you learned, not what you accomplished, what you learned. The accomplishments are secondary, the learning is primary. What worked? What did not work? What surprised you? What will you do differently in the next cycle? You hold a final growth pod meeting. You share your summaries. You listen to theirs. You do not fix, you do not compare. You witness, you honor, you close the loop. Then you plan the next cycle. The 12-week protocol is not a one-time event. It is a structure you return to again and again. Each cycle you start where you are. Each cycle you go deeper. Each cycle you build on what came before. Some people run the protocol twice a year. Some run it continuously with a pause week every 13th week. There is no right frequency. There is only the frequency that keeps you moving without burning you out. A note on missing weeks. You will miss weeks. Life will intervene. You will get sick. You will have a crisis. You will lose momentum. This is not failure. This is reality. When you miss a week, you do not punish yourself. You do not start over. You note what happened. You ask what you can learn, and you resume the protocol where you left off. The protocol is not a straight line, it is a spiral. You will return to the same challenges again and again. Each time you will be slightly higher, slightly stronger, slightly more capable. The progress is not linear, the progress is real. David ran the protocol 3 times. The first time he made it to week 7 before collapsing. The second time he made it to week 10. The third time he completed all 12 weeks. He is not special, he is persistent. Persistence is not a personality trait. Persistence is a choice made repeatedly, especially when the choice is hard. The next chapter applies the protocol to specific adversities. Loss, illness, betrayal, professional failure. Each of these has unique features. Each requires adjustments to the protocol. The frameworks are the same. The application is tailored. Before you turn that page, decide. Will you run the protocol? Not someday, not when you feel ready, not when life calms down. Will you start week 1 on Monday? The answer to that question matters more than any framework in this book. Frameworks without action are entertainment. Action without frameworks is chaos. The protocol is the bridge between them. Chapter 10. Engineering for Specific Adversities. The frameworks in this book are general. They work across many contexts, but adversity is not general. It is specific. The death of a child is not the same as the loss of a job. A cancer diagnosis is not the same as a betrayal by a spouse. Each form of adversity has its own texture, its own timeline, its own unique shape of suffering. This chapter translates the general frameworks into specific applications. 4 common forms of adversity: loss and grief, illness and injury, betrayal and broken trust, professional failure and career collapse. For each, I will walk you through how the growth engineering loop, the calibration model, cognitive reappraisal, narrative architecture, social scaffolding, and behavioral activation apply differently. The tools are the same. The way you use them changes. If your adversity is not one of these 4, do not skip this chapter. The principles of translation will help you adapt the frameworks to your own situation. You are looking for patterns, not prescriptions. Loss and grief. Grief is not a problem to be solved. It is an experience to be integrated. The worst thing you can do with grief is try to engineer it away. The goal of growth engineering in grief is not to stop grieving. The goal is to build a life that includes the loss without being destroyed by it. Calibration in grief. Grief comes in waves. Your capacity fluctuates wildly. One day you can function. The next day you cannot get out of bed. The calibration model in grief requires radical flexibility. You do not set a stressor size and stick to it. You check in with yourself hourly. A stressor that was 70% of your capacity at 9 a.m. might be 150% at 2 p.m. The engineering response is not to push through. The engineering response is to adjust, to rest, to try again later. Reappraisal in grief. The old belief in grief is often some version of, I cannot live without this person. That belief is true in a literal sense. You cannot live the life you lived before. That life is gone. The stacked belief is, I cannot live the life I lived before. That life is over. But I can live a different life, a life that includes the memory of this person, a life that is shaped by loss without being defined by it. This is not positive thinking. This is not everything happens for a reason. It is simply the recognition that life continues, changed, and that continuing is not betrayal. Narrative in grief. The old story in grief is a story of before and after. Before the death, life was whole. After the death, life is broken. The narrative task is not to erase the break. The task is to build a bridge across it. The bridge is made of memory, ritual, and continued relationship with the dead. Many grieving people find that the dead remain present, not as ghosts, as influences, as voices in their head, as legacies they carry forward. The new story is, I am someone who was loved by this person. That love continues, not in the same form, in a different form, but continues. Scaffolding in grief. Grief isolates. People do not know what to say. They say stupid things. They disappear. The scaffolding for grief must be intentional and often small. A friend who agrees to sit with you in silence for 20 minutes. A support group of people who have lost someone and will not try to fix you. A ritual you perform alone or with others. The key is to reduce the need for explanation. You do not have the energy to explain your grief to people who do not understand. Find the few who do. Spend your energy there. Activation in grief. The 2% rule in grief looks different. Your 2% might be getting out of bed, brushing your teeth, eating one meal, sending one text, not because these things are growth, because these things are survival, and survival is the foundation on which growth is built. You cannot grow from grief if you are not eating. Start with survival. When survival is stable, add one small thing. A walk to the mailbox, a phone call to a friend, a memory written down. The woman who taught me about grief was named Helen. She lost her son to an overdose when he was 24. She spent the first year after his death in a fog of numbness and rage. She hated every book that told her to find meaning in his death. There was no meaning. There was only a hole where her son used to be. When she came to see me, she was not looking for growth. She was looking for permission to stop pretending. I gave her that. I told her she did not have to grow. She did not have to find meaning. She did not have to be grateful for anything. She only had to survive the next hour. That was enough. Over time, survival became easier. The waves of grief came less frequently. When they came, they still knocked her down. But she learned to get up faster. She learned to anticipate the waves. She learned to ask for help before the wave hit, not after. She never grew from her son's death. She grew around it. She built a life that had room for the whole. The whole did not shrink. Her life grew larger. That is the shape of post-traumatic growth in grief. Not filling the hole, building a container big enough to hold it. Illness and injury. Illness and injury are different from loss because the adversary is inside you. Your own body becomes the source of suffering. This creates a unique psychological challenge. You cannot run from your body. You cannot negotiate with it. You can only learn to live with it, changed. Calibration in illness. Your capacity is not stable. Treatment has good days and bad days. Pain fluctuates, energy fluctuates. The calibration model in illness requires you to distinguish between the illness and your response to it. Some days your capacity is low because the illness is active. On those days, rest is the correct engineering response. Some days your capacity is low because you have been avoiding the fear of the illness. On those days, gentle exposure is the correct response. The distinction is crucial. Treating illness fatigue as avoidance leads to burnout. Treating avoidance as illness fatigue leads to stagnation. Reappraisal in illness. The old belief in illness is often my body has betrayed me. This belief is understandable. It is also not useful. The stacked belief is, my body is not betraying me. My body is doing what bodies do. Some bodies get sick, some bodies get hurt. My body is one of those bodies. That is not betrayal. That is the reality of having a body. This reappraisal does not erase the pain. It changes the relationship to the pain. You are not at war with your body. You are living with a body that has limits. Everyone has limits. Yours are just more visible. Narrative in illness. The old story in illness is a story of before and after. Before the diagnosis, I was healthy. After the diagnosis, I am sick. The narrative task is to complicate that binary. Health and sickness are not opposites. They are a continuum. Everyone is on the continuum. The question is not whether you are sick or healthy. The question is what kind of life you can build with the body you have. Some people with severe illness build rich, meaningful lives. Some people with perfect health build empty, miserable lives. The body is not the whole story. Scaffolding in illness. Illness requires practical scaffolding. People who bring meals, people who drive you to appointments, people who sit with you during treatment. These are not optional. They are engineering. You cannot grow through illness alone. You also need emotional scaffolding. People who do not offer unsolicited advice. People who do not tell you about their cousin who cured their cancer with kale. People who can sit with you in the uncertainty without trying to resolve it. Find these people, let them help. Activation in illness. The 2% rule in illness is often about acceptance rather than change. Your 2% might be, today I will do one thing that I can still do, even if it is not the thing I want to do. Read one page. Listen to one song. Sit outside for 2 minutes. The action is not about improving your condition. The action is about maintaining your sense of agency. Illness takes so much from you. Do not let it take your ability to choose, even small choices, even choices that seem trivial. Choose something, do it. That is resistance. Tessa, the rock climber from Chapter 4, eventually found her way to this kind of activation. She could not climb. She could barely walk without a cane. But she could swim. Not fast, not far, but she could move her body in water without pain. She started swimming 3 times a week. 10 minutes, then 15, then 20. She was not training for anything. She was not trying to get better. She was simply refusing to let her injury define the entire range of what her body could do. Swimming did not heal her. It did not give her back the life she had lost, but it gave her something. A relationship with her body that was not purely adversarial, a sense that she was not just a broken person. She was a person with a broken part. The part was real. The person was more than the part. Betrayal and broken trust. Betrayal is different from loss and illness because it involves another person's choice. Someone chose to hurt you. Someone chose to break a promise. Someone chose to prioritize their own needs over yours. That choice creates a unique kind of suffering, the suffering of being seen as disposable. Calibration in betrayal. The stressor in betrayal is trust itself. After betrayal, trust becomes terrifying. The calibration model says, do not start with big trusts. Start with tiny trusts. Trust a barista to make your coffee correctly. Trust a friend to show up on time. Trust yourself to handle disappointment if the trust is broken. Each small trust is a rep. You are building your trust muscle back, 1 rep at a time. It will be weak at first. That is fine. Weak muscles get stronger with progressive overload. Trust is the same. Reappraisal in betrayal. The old belief in betrayal is often I cannot trust anyone. This belief is protective. It is also isolating. The stacked belief is I cannot trust everyone. That is true, I never could. I was wrong to trust that person. But that does not mean trust itself is impossible. It means I need better criteria for who deserves my trust. This reappraisal shifts the focus from the other person to your own discernment. You cannot control whether people betray you. You can control who you let close enough to betray you. That is not victim blaming, that is agency, narrative in betrayal. The old story in betrayal is a story of victimhood. Someone did something to me. I was powerless. The narrative task is not to deny the victimhood. You were a victim. That is a fact. The task is to move from being only a victim to being a survivor who was victimized. The difference is time. A victim is defined by the past. A survivor carries the past but is not defined by it. The new story is, someone betrayed me. That happened. It was not my fault. And I am not staying there. I am moving forward. Not because I forgive them. Because I refuse to let their choice be the center of my life. Scaffolding in betrayal. Betrayal requires witnesses. People who believe you. People who do not ask what you did to deserve it. People who do not try to mediate between you and the person who hurt you. Find these people. They are rarer than they should be. When you find them, hold on to them. They are your reality check. When the betrayal makes you doubt your own perception, they remind you what happened. They hold the truth when you cannot hold it yourself. Activation in betrayal. The 2% rule in betrayal is about rebuilding your relationship with your own judgment. After betrayal, you may doubt every decision you ever made. The antidote is small decisions. Choose what to eat for breakfast. Choose what to wear. Choose what to watch. Each small choice is evidence that your judgment still works. Not perfectly, but it works. You can trust yourself on small things. The small things build toward the large things. Elena's husband did not just leave her. He spent 9 years convincing her that she was not enough. The betrayal was not the leaving. The betrayal was the years of diminishment that preceded it. When she came to see me, she could not trust her own taste in music. She had deferred to him for so long that she no longer knew what she liked. Her 2% actions were tiny. Choose a song. Listen to it. Do not ask anyone if it is good. Just listen. Decide whether you like it. That is the whole task. She did this every day for 3 months. Song by song, she rebuilt her relationship with her own preferences. Song by song, she learned that her judgment was not broken. It had just been suppressed. Suppression is reversible. Professional failure and career collapse. Professional failure is different from the other 3 because it involves public shame. Everyone can see that you lost your job. Everyone can see that your business failed. Everyone can see that you were passed over for promotion. The visibility of professional failure creates a unique suffering. The suffering of being seen as less than. Calibration in professional failure. The stressor is exposure. After failure, you may want to hide. The calibration model says, hide for a while, rest, recover, then slowly expose yourself again. Start with low-stakes professional environments, a networking event where you do not have to talk about your failure, a conversation with a trusted colleague who knows what happened, a small project with no visibility. Each exposure is a rep. You are rebuilding your professional identity 1 rep at a time. Reappraisal in professional failure. The old belief is often I am a failure, not I failed at something. I am a failure. The difference is everything. The stacked belief is I failed at something. That is true. I am also someone who has succeeded at other things. I am also someone who will try again. I am also someone who learned something from this failure. I am many things. Failure is one of them. It is not all of them. Narrative in professional failure. The old story is a story of descent. I was successful. Then I fell. The narrative task is to complicate the descent. What did you learn in the fall? What did you discover about yourself when the external markers of success were stripped away? Who are you without the title, the salary, the status? That person may be more interesting than the person who never failed. The new story is, I lost something. In the losing, I found something else, something I would not have found without the loss. Scaffolding in professional failure. Professional failure requires a different kind of scaffolding than the other forms. You need people who see your value independent of your resume. People who knew you before the failure and did not stop knowing you after. People who will write you letters of recommendation that acknowledge the failure honestly and still recommend you. These people are gold. Do not take them for granted. Activation in professional failure. The 2% rule is about rebuilding your professional identity through action, not through thinking, through doing. Update one line of your resume. Send one email to one person who might have a lead. Research one company that interests you. Read one article about an industry you might want to enter. Each action is small. Each action is evidence that you are not paralyzed. You are moving. Slowly, but moving. I worked with a man named Peter who had been a senior executive at a company that collapsed due to fraud. He had done nothing wrong. He had not known about the fraud, but he was the public face of the collapse. His name was in the newspapers. His reputation was destroyed through no fault of his own. Peter spent a year hiding. He did not apply for jobs. He did not return calls from recruiters. He sat in his home office and stared at the wall. When he finally came to see me, he was not depressed. He was frozen. He believed that his professional life was over, not because the evidence said so, because the shame said so. We started with the 2% rule. Day 1, update your LinkedIn profile. Not the whole thing. One line. Day 2, send an email to one former colleague who you trust. Not asking for a job, just saying hello. Day 3, read one job description for a role you might want. Do not apply. Just read. Peter did these tiny actions for 6 weeks. Nothing happened. No job offers, no breakthroughs. Then, on week 7, the former colleague he had emailed mentioned his name to a friend who was hiring. Peter got an interview. He was terrified. He almost canceled. He did not cancel. He went. He was honest about what had happened. The company hired him anyway. Peter is not a special case. He is an example of what happens when you refuse to let professional failure be the last word. The last word is not written by the failure. The last word is written by the action that follows the failure, even if the action is tiny, even if the action seems pointless. Action is the only thing that writes new words on the page. When your adversity is not here. The 4 forms of adversity in this chapter cover many experiences. They do not cover all. If your adversity is not here, the task is translation. Ask yourself, what is the unique texture of my suffering? What makes it different from loss, illness, betrayal, or professional failure? Once you can name the difference, you can adapt the frameworks. The frameworks are general. Your situation is specific. The work is in the translation. No book can do that translation for you. This book can give you the tools. You have to be the engineer who applies them. The next chapter moves from the active work of growth to the long game. Maintenance, preventing growth collapse. The structures that keep you from sliding back into old patterns when life gets hard again, because growth is not a destination, it is a direction. And direction requires continuous calibration. Chapter 11. Maintenance preventing growth collapse. The hardest part of growth is not the climbing, it is not slipping, it is staying. I learned this from a man named Frank. Frank was 63 years old when he came to see me. He had been sober for 22 years. He had been through 2 divorces, a bankruptcy, and the death of his oldest son. He had grown more than anyone I had ever met. He was also, in his own words, one bad day away from drinking himself to death. Frank was not being dramatic. He was being accurate. He knew that growth is not permanent. Growth is a structure that requires maintenance. He had seen too many people in his AA meetings who had grown for years, stopped maintaining, and collapsed. He did not want to be one of them. Most books about growth stop at the transformation. They tell you how to change. They do not tell you how to stay changed. This chapter is the missing piece. Maintenance. the systems and practices that prevent growth collapse, the difference between a person who grew and a person who keeps growing. The three threats to maintained growth collapses for three reasons. The first is complacency. You have grown. You feel better. You stop doing the work. Slowly, imperceptibly, the old patterns creep back in. You do not notice until you are back where you started, wondering how you got there. The second is shock. A new adversity hits, something you did not expect, something outside your calibration range. The old coping mechanisms come roaring back because they are familiar. They are neural highways. The new growth is a dirt road. In a crisis, the brain takes the highway. The dirt road disappears. The third is drift. Life changes. Your circumstances shift. Your social scaffolding erodes. People move away, jobs change, routines break. The systems that supported your growth are no longer in place. You do not notice the erosion because it happens slowly, one brick at a time. Then one day you look around and the scaffolding is gone. Each of these threats requires a different maintenance strategy. Complacency requires structure. Shock requires resilience reserves. Drift requires environmental auditing. Frank understood all three. He had a system for each. That system had kept him sober for 22 years. It could keep you growing for decades. Maintenance strategy. 1. The minimum effective dose. The first maintenance strategy is the most counterintuitive. You do not keep doing the full protocol forever. That leads to burnout. You find the minimum effective dose, the smallest amount of work that keeps you from sliding backward. For Frank, the minimum effective dose was three things. 1. AA meeting per week, a 5-minute daily check-in with his sponsor, a nightly writing practice where he answered 2 questions. What did I do today that I am proud of? What did I do today that I need to watch? That was it. 20 minutes a day, 1 hour a week. That small investment had kept him sober and growing for more than 2 decades. Not because he was special, because he was consistent. The minimum effective dose only works if you take it every day. Missing a day is fine. Missing a week is dangerous. Missing a month is collapse. To find your minimum effective dose, ask yourself a simple question. What is the smallest possible set of practices that, if I did them consistently, would keep me from losing what I have gained? Not what would help me grow more, what would keep me from collapsing? The answer might be one sentence. Every morning I will write down my stacked belief. Every evening I will name one thing I did today that counts as moving forward. Every week I will meet with my growth pod for 30 minutes. The minimum effective dose is not heroic. It is barely noticeable. That is the point. If it is barely noticeable, you will do it. If you do it, you will maintain. If you maintain, you will be in a position to grow again when the time is right. Maintenance strategy. 2. Shock drills. The second maintenance strategy is preparation for the unexpected. You cannot predict when the next shock will come. You can prepare for the fact that it will come. Shock drills are small simulations of adversity. You deliberately expose yourself to a controlled stressor that is slightly larger than your current capacity. Not to grow, to practice, to keep your growth flexible, to remind your nervous system that it can handle surprises. For Frank, shock drills looked like this. Once a month, he would go to a party where he knew there would be alcohol. He would not drink. He would stay for 2 hours. He would practice saying no. He would practice leaving when he felt unsafe. He did not need to do this to avoid drinking. He had not been tempted to drink in years. He did it to keep his refusal muscles strong. He did it so that if a real crisis came, his body would remember what to do. Your shock drills will look different. If your growth has been about social anxiety, your shock drill might be going to a crowded place alone. If your growth has been about work avoidance, your shock drill might be checking email on a Sunday evening. If your growth has been about grief, your shock drill might be listening to a song that reminds you of the person you lost. The key is dosage. Shock drills should be challenging, but not overwhelming. They should push you to the edge of your capacity without pushing you over. They should leave you feeling capable, not depleted. If a shock drill leaves you depleted, it was too large. Scale back, find the edge, stay at the edge. Maintenance strategy. 3. The quarterly audit. The third maintenance strategy addresses drift. Every 3 months, you stop. You look at your life. You ask whether your scaffolding is still standing. The quarterly audit takes 2 hours. You do it alone or with your growth pod. You ask 5 questions. First, what has changed in my life since the last audit? New job, new relationship, lost relationship, moved, health change, any change, large or small. Changes are the enemies of maintenance. They shift your environment. They require adjustments. Second, who are my growth supporters now? Is the list the same as last quarter? Have I lost anyone? Have I gained anyone? Have I been spending time with people who undermine my growth without noticing? Third, what practices have slipped? The minimum effective dose is only effective if you take it. Have you been skipping? Have you been telling yourself that skipping does not matter? It does matter. Skipping is how drift starts. Fourth, what new challenges have emerged? Not the challenges you expected, the challenges you did not see coming. These are the ones that will undermine your growth if you do not name them. Fifth, what one adjustment will I make before the next quarter? Not 10 adjustments. 1. A single change to your maintenance system. Something small, something specific, something you can implement immediately. Frank did his quarterly audit like clockwork. First Saturday of January, April, July, October. He cleared his calendar. He went to a coffee shop. He wrote his answers in a notebook he had kept for 22 years. He could look back and see the drift before it happened. He could see the quarter when he started skipping meetings, the quarter when his sponsor moved away and he did not find a new one, the quarter when his drinking dreams came back. He caught each of these drifts early because he was looking for them. Early detection is the difference between a small adjustment and a full collapse. The Relapse Resilience Inventory. The quarterly audit is for slow drift. The Relapse Resilience Inventory is for the moments when you feel yourself slipping, when the old thoughts come back, when the old behaviors start to look attractive, when you are not sure whether you are maintaining or collapsing. The inventory takes 10 minutes. You ask yourself 7 questions. You answer honestly. No one sees the answers but you. 1. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I feel like the person I was before I started growing? 1 means I feel completely like the new person. 10 means I feel completely like the old person. If your answer is above a 6, you are in the danger zone. 2. When was the last time I did my minimum effective dose practices? If the answer is more than 7 days ago, you are drifting. 3. Who have I been spending time with? List the last 5 people you spent more than an hour with. Are they growth supporters, growth neutrals, growth blockers? If you have spent time with blockers recently, you are at risk. 4. What have I been telling myself? Write down the automatic thoughts that have been running through your head. Are they the old beliefs? Are they the stacked beliefs? If the old beliefs have taken over, you are not maintaining. You are collapsing. 5. When was the last time I asked for help? If the answer is more than 2 weeks ago, you are isolating. Isolation is the breeding ground of collapse. 6. What would I tell a friend who was answering these questions the same way I am? This question breaks through self-deception. You are kinder to your friends than you are to yourself. Borrow that kindness. 7. What is one thing I will do in the next 24 hours to stabilize? Not a plan for the next month. One thing, today. Call your sponsor. Go to a meeting. Send a text to your growth pod. Do your minimum effective dose practices even if you have been skipping one thing. The relapse resilience inventory is not a test you pass or fail. It is a diagnostic tool. It tells you where you are. The answer is never shameful. The answer is just data. Data tells you what to do next. When collapse happens, anyway, despite all your maintenance, you may still collapse. The old patterns may return. The growth may seem to disappear. This is not failure. This is the normal course of human change. Collapse is not the end. Collapse is information. When collapse happens, you do not shame yourself. Shame leads to hiding. Hiding leads to deeper collapse. You do not pretend it did not happen. Pretending leads to denial. Denial leads to stagnation. You do three things. First, you name it. Out loud. To someone. I collapsed. I am back where I started. I need help. The naming breaks the isolation. The isolation is what makes collapse permanent. Second, you go back to the beginning. You do not start where you left off. You go back to sensing, to calibrating, to the small stressors. You rebuild from the foundation. The foundation is still there. It may be cracked. It is not gone. Third, you ask what the collapse taught you, not why it happened. That question leads to blame. What did it teach you? Did you ignore your minimum effective dose? Did you stop auditing? Did a shock come that you were not prepared for? The answers are not confessions. The answers are design improvements. You will build the next iteration of your growth system with these answers in mind. Frank collapsed twice in 22 years. Once at year 4, once at year 11. Both times he drank. Not heavily, not for long, but he drank. Both times he called his sponsor before the hangover wore off. Both times he went back to the beginning. He went to 90 meetings in 90 days. He rebuilt his maintenance system from scratch. Both times he came back stronger. He did not collapse because he was weak. He collapsed because he was human, and he recovered because he had a system for recovery. The system did not prevent the collapse. The system made the collapse survivable. That is the purpose of maintenance, not perfection. Resilience within the collapse. Growth as a direction, not a destination. The language of growth implies a destination. You grow from here to there. You arrive. You are done. That language is misleading. Growth is not a destination, it is a direction. You are never done. You are always in the process. The question is not whether you have arrived. The question is whether you are still moving. Maintenance is the recognition that movement requires energy. You cannot coast. Coasting is downhill. If you are not actively maintaining, you are actively collapsing. There is no neutral. The default setting of an unmaintained system is entropy. Things fall apart. That is physics. That is psychology. That is life. The good news is that maintenance does not require heroism. It requires structure. A minimum effective dose, shock drills, quarterly audits, a relapse inventory. These are not burdens. These are freedoms. They free you from the fear of losing what you have gained. They free you from the need for constant vigilance. They are the rails that keep the train on the track. You still have to drive. You do not have to steer every second. Frank died 5 years after I met him. Heart attack and sudden. His son found him in his garden, kneeling in the dirt, wearing the same hat he had worn for 20 years. At his funeral, his sponsor spoke. He said, Frank was not a saint. He was a mechanic. He kept his own engine running. He helped 1,000 other people keep theirs running. That is not less than sainthood. That is more. Because it is real. The next chapter moves from individual maintenance to collective growth, engineering growth in organizations and teams, how the same principles apply to groups, how you can build systems that help everyone grow, not just you. Because the ultimate expression of growth is not personal strength. It is the capacity to help others grow. Before you turn that page, do one thing. Identify your minimum effective dose. Write it down. One sentence. The smallest possible set of practices that will keep you from losing what you have gained. Put that sentence somewhere you will see it every day. That sentence is not a plan. It is a promise you make to your future self. A promise that your future self will thank you for keeping. Chapter 12, Engineering Growth in Organizations and Teams. For the first 11 chapters, this book has been about one person. You, your suffering, your growth, your maintenance. That was necessary. You cannot build collective growth on a foundation of individual collapse. But individual growth is not the final destination. It is the starting point. The final destination is collective, families that grow together after crisis, teams that emerge stronger from failure, organizations that do not just survive disruption, but are transformed by it. Communities that turn shared trauma into shared strength. This chapter translates the frameworks of post-traumatic growth engineering from the individual to the collective. The principles are the same. The tools look different, because groups are not just larger individuals. Groups have their own dynamics, their own pathologies, their own unique opportunities for growth. Why most organizations fail at growth. I have consulted for dozens of organizations after crises, a factory after a fatal accident, a tech startup after a public failure, a hospital after a preventable patient death, a school after a shooting. In almost every case, the organization did the same thing. They brought in crisis counselors, they held a mandatory meeting, they issued a statement about resilience. And then they went back to work as quickly as possible, hoping everyone would just get over it. This is the organizational version of the myth of resilience alone. It does not work. Employees do not get over it. They suppress. They pretend. They go back to work with the same crumpled paper feeling that Daniel the firefighter had. They are functional. They are not growing. And over time, the suppressed trauma leaks out as burnout, turnover, cynicism, and silent quitting. Organizations fail at post-traumatic growth for 3 reasons. First, they confuse individual resilience with organizational design. They assume that if they hire resilient people, the organization will be resilient. This is backwards. Resilient people leave toxic organizations. They do not stay and fix them. Organizational growth requires organizational systems, not just individual grit. Second, they rush the timeline. Growth takes time. Organizations want to return to productivity immediately. The pressure to perform kills the conditions for growth. You cannot grow on a deadline. You can only pretend to grow. The pretending eventually collapses. Third, they avoid shared meaning-making. After a collective trauma, people need to talk. They need to make sense of what happened together. Organizations are terrified of these conversations. They might lead to blame. They might lead to criticism of leadership. They might open wounds that cannot be easily closed. So they shut the conversations down. And in shutting them down, they shut down the only path to collective growth. The 5 domains of collective growth. The 5 domains of post-traumatic growth translate directly to organizations. Each domain has a collective form. Collective appreciation of life means the organization stops taking its existence for granted. After a near failure, a grateful organization is not naive. It is awake. It knows that it almost lost everything. That knowledge sharpens attention. It clarifies priorities. It makes the mundane meaningful. Teams that have nearly failed together often report a new sense of purpose. They stop wasting time on internal politics. They focus on what actually matters. Collective relating to others means the organization's internal relationships deepen. Hierarchy softens. Silos break down. People who never spoke before find themselves supporting each other. The US versus them mentality between departments, between management and staff, between tenured and new, can dissolve in the face of shared adversity. Not automatically, but potentially. The potential must be engineered. Collective personal strength means the organization develops a new confidence. We survived that. We can survive almost anything. This is not arrogance. It is evidence-based self-trust. The organization has data now. It has been tested. It did not break. That knowledge changes how the organization faces future challenges, not with fear, with a quiet, earned certainty. Collective new possibilities means the organization re-examines its assumptions. Why do we do things this way? Because we always have. That answer no longer holds. Adversity creates permission to ask forbidden questions, to change strategies, to abandon products, to enter new markets, to restructure. The organizations that grow from crisis are the ones that use the crisis as a forcing function for change they should have made anyway. Collective spiritual or existential change means the organization revisits its reason for being. Why do we exist? What is our purpose? Who do we serve? These questions are uncomfortable. Most organizations avoid them. Adversity forces them. The organizations that grow are the ones that answer honestly, even when the answer requires change. The collective growth engineering loop. The growth engineering loop works for organizations as well as individuals. The phases are the same. The methods are different. Sense, collectively. The organization must take an honest inventory of its current state. Not the spin, not the public statement. The truth. What is the actual morale? What are people saying in private? What is the hidden damage that no one is reporting? This requires psychological safety. People must believe they can speak without retaliation. Most organizations do not have this. They cannot grow until they build it. Deconstruct collectively. The organization must break the crisis into its component parts. What failed? Why did it fail? Who knew what, when? What systemic factors contributed? This is not about blame. Blame shuts down learning. This is about understanding. The difference between a blame conversation and a learning conversation is the difference between finding a person to fire and finding a system to fix. Architect collectively. The organization must design specific measurable changes, not vague commitments to doing better. Concrete protocols, new training, different incentives, restructured reporting lines. The architecture must be co-created. Changes imposed from the top are resisted. Changes built by the people who will live with them are owned. Test, collectively. The organization must pilot the changes. One team, one department, one location. Collect data. What works? What does not? Just before scaling. The pressure to scale immediately is intense. Resist it. Pilot first, learn first, scale second. Integrate collectively. The changes that work must become part of the organization's operating system. New habits, new norms, new stories about who we are and what we value. Integration takes time. It takes reinforcement. It takes leadership modeling the new behaviors every single day. The role of leadership matters more in collective growth than in individual growth. A single person can grow without a leader. A team cannot. Someone has to hold the container. Someone has to create the conditions. Someone has to model the vulnerability that growth requires. The leaders who engineer collective growth do 5 things. First, they name the adversity directly. They do not euphemize. They do not minimize. They say, We experienced a failure. People were hurt. We are responsible for making sure it does not happen again. Naming creates the conditions for sense-making. Without naming, people fill the vacuum with rumor and fear. Second, they share their own struggles. They do not pretend to have all the answers. They say, I am struggling with this too. I do not know exactly how we will get through it, but I know we will get through it together. This is not weakness. This is the opposite of the old command and control model. This is leadership as honest witness. Third, they protect the conditions for growth. They push back against the pressure to rush. They refuse to sacrifice learning for productivity. They defend the people who speak truth. They absorb criticism from above so their teams do not have to. This is the hard part. Growth is not popular in the short term. Leaders who engineer growth accept short-term unpopularity for long-term strength. Fourth, they model the practices. They do the 5-sentence rewrite for the organization's story. They share it. They ask for feedback. They revise it. They show that the story is alive, not fixed. They attend the sense-making sessions. They listen more than they speak. They apologize when they are wrong. They do not ask their teams to do anything they are not doing themselves. Fifth, they celebrate small wins. Collective growth is slow. The organization needs evidence that it is moving forward. Leaders provide that evidence, not through empty cheerleading, through specific earned recognition. 6 weeks ago, we could not talk about what happened. Today, we had a 30-minute conversation without anyone shutting down. That is progress. That matters. The post-mortem that becomes a genesis. Every organization does post-mortems after failure. Most post-mortems are useless. They are performed too quickly. They focus on technical causes, not psychological ones. They produce reports that no one reads. They satisfy a requirement and then are forgotten. A genesis is different from a post-mortem. A post-mortem looks backward. A genesis looks forward. A post-mortem asks, what went wrong? A genesis asks, what wants to be born from what went wrong? To run a genesis, you gather the team. You set aside 4 hours. You bring food. You create a container where people can speak honestly. You ask 3 questions. First question, what did we lose? Not just money or time. What did we lose that cannot be replaced? Trust, reputation, innocence, a sense of safety. Name the losses, grieve them. You cannot grow from losses you have not acknowledged. Second question, what did we learn? Not what we wish we had learned. What did we actually learn the hard way through experience? List the lessons. Do not evaluate them. Just list them. The list will be longer than you expect. Third question, what will we do differently now? This is the generative question. It assumes that the future will be different. It assumes that the organization has agency. It forces specificity. Not, we will communicate better. We will hold a 15-minute check-in every morning for the next 90 days. That is a genesis. That is a new beginning built from the wreckage of an old ending. The genesis should be documented, not as a report, as a living document, a document that is revisited, a document that changes, a document that becomes the organization's origin story for its next chapter. When the organization will not grow, not every organization can grow. Some are too rigid, some are too hierarchical, some are too trapped in fear. Some have leaders who are too threatened by the changes that growth would require. If you are in an organization that will not grow, you have 3 choices. First, you can grow in place. You can use the individual frameworks to protect your own psychological strength while staying in the organization. You can build your own scaffolding. You can calibrate your own stressors. You can do the minimum effective dose of maintenance. You cannot force the organization to grow. You can keep yourself from collapsing. Second, you can influence upward. You can find allies. You can build a coalition. You can start a growth pod within the organization. You can model the practices and let others see the results. Some organizations change from the bottom up. Not most, but some. You will not know if you do not try. Third, you can leave. This is the hardest choice. It is also sometimes the only choice. Staying in an organization that actively blocks growth is like staying in a relationship that actively blocks growth. It will erode you. Not quickly, slowly, imperceptibly, until one day you realize you have become smaller than you were. If you cannot grow and you cannot change the organization, leaving is not failure. Leaving is engineering. It is designing an environment where growth is possible. Patricia, the NICU nurse from Chapter 7, eventually left her unit. She loved the work. She loved the babies. She loved her growth pod, but the organization would not change. The staffing ratios did not improve. The debriefing protocols remained insufficient. The leadership continued to treat burnout as an individual problem rather than a design problem. Patricia left. She became a nurse educator. She now teaches new nurses how to build their own scaffolding. She saved herself. She is now saving others. Leaving was not defeat. Leaving was strategy. The ripple effect. Collective growth does not stop at the boundaries of the organization. It ripples outward. A team that grows together changes the families its members go home to. A school that grows after a crisis changes the community it serves. A hospital that grows changes the patients who pass through its doors. A company that grows changes the industry that watches it. You cannot control the ripples. You can only create the conditions. You can design the systems. You can model the practices. You can tell a different story about what is possible after adversity. And then you let go. The ripples will go where they go. Some will fade. Some will crash on shores you never imagined. Some will become waves that other organizations ride. Frank, the man who maintained his sobriety for 22 years, was not a leader in any formal sense. He was a mechanic. He fixed cars. But he also sponsored dozens of men through their own recovery. He sat with them in church basements. He listened to their fifth-step inventories. He answered their 3 a.m. phone calls. He did not have a title. He had a practice, and his practice rippled. Men he sponsored other men. Those men sponsored others. Frank never saw the full ripple. He died before most of it spread. But the ripple continued without him. That is collective growth. It outlives the individual who started it. The next chapter closes the book. It is not a conclusion. Conclusions end things. This chapter is a boundary. The limits and ethics of growth engineering. What this book cannot do. What you should not try. When to put the frameworks down. When growth is not the answer. And the permission to stop growing when stopping is what you need. Before you turn that page, look around your organization, your team, your family, your community. Where is the collective suffering that no one is naming? Where is the potential for collective growth that no one is engineering? What would it take to start one Genesis conversation? Not a series, not a program. One conversation, an hour, 3 questions. That is where collective growth begins. Not with a strategy, with a conversation. Chapter 13. The Limits and Ethics of Growth Engineering. This book has made a promise. The promise is that adversity can be turned into strength, that growth can be engineered, that suffering does not have to be wasted. I believe this promise. I have seen it fulfilled in the lives of Daniel, Elena, Marcus, Tessa, David, Frank, and dozens of others whose stories are not in these pages. But a promise without limits is a lie. A framework without ethics is a weapon. This final chapter is not a conclusion. It is a boundary. It is the fence that keeps the garden from becoming a prison. It is the voice that says, this far and no further. Because there are times when growth engineering is the wrong tool, times when the engineer is the wrong person, times when the demand to grow becomes another form of violence. This chapter is about those times. Read it before you apply anything else in this book. The limits protect you. The ethics protect the people you love. When growth engineering is the wrong tool, the first limit is situational. Growth engineering assumes a certain baseline of stability. It assumes you are not in active crisis. It assumes you have basic needs met. It assumes you have some capacity to act, even if that capacity is small. If these assumptions are false, put the book down. Do not use growth engineering when you are actively suicidal. Get help. Call a crisis line. Go to an emergency room. The frameworks in this book are for building strength, not for stopping bleeding. Stop the bleeding first. Do not use growth engineering when you are in the middle of an acute trauma. The first week after a rape, the first month after a death, the first day after a diagnosis. Your nervous system is in survival mode. It cannot grow. It can only survive. Let it survive. Do not ask it to do more. Do not use growth engineering when you are in withdrawal from substances. Your brain chemistry is not stable. The frameworks will not work. Focus on detoxification. Focus on sobriety. Come back to growth when your system has settled. Do not use growth engineering when you are severely sleep-deprived, malnourished, or otherwise physiologically compromised. Growth requires energy. If you have no energy, you cannot grow. Rest, eat, sleep, heal your body. The mind will follow. These are not excuses. These are engineering constraints. You cannot build a bridge on a foundation that is still shaking. You cannot grow psychological strength from a body that is barely functioning. The order of operations matters. Survival first, stabilization second, growth third. Do not skip steps. Who this book is not for. The second limit is personal. Growth engineering assumes a certain level of insight and motivation. It assumes you want to grow. It assumes you are willing to do the work. These assumptions are not true for everyone. That is fine. That does not make you broken. It makes you human. This book is not for people who are content with their suffering. If you have found a way to live with your pain that does not harm you or others, and you do not want to change, then do not change. Growth is not mandatory. Contentment is not failure. Some people do not need to grow. They need to be left alone. This book respects that. This book is not for people who are actively harming others. If you are abusive, if you are violent, if you are using your trauma as permission to hurt people, do not use these frameworks. They will only make you more effective at causing harm. Get help for your behavior first. Stop hurting people. Then maybe consider growth. This book is not for people who are being asked to grow by someone else. Growth cannot be imposed. It cannot be demanded. It cannot be required as a condition of love, employment, or belonging. If someone is telling you that you need to grow, ask whether they are trying to help you or control you. The difference is everything. Genuine help offers resources and steps back. Control sets conditions and watches. The ethics of engineer as witness. If you are a therapist, coach, manager, teacher, or anyone else who uses these frameworks with other people, you have an ethical obligation. You are not an engineer of other people's growth. You are a witness. You are a scaffold. You are not the builder. The builder is the person who is growing. They choose, they act, they integrate. Your job is to create the conditions, to hold the container, to ask the questions, to reflect what you hear, to offer frameworks without demanding they be used, to stay present when the growth is messy, to celebrate without taking credit. The most important ethical rule in growth engineering is this: never want someone's growth more than they want it themselves. If you want someone to grow and they do not want to grow, you are not helping them. You are pursuing your own agenda. That agenda may be dressed in the language of care. It is still control. Step back. Let them be where they are. Your job is not to fix. Your job is to be available. Availability is enough. Patricia, the NICU nurse who became an educator, taught me this. She had a student who was clearly suffering. The student was drinking. The student was missing class. The student was failing. Patricia wanted to help. She wanted to intervene. She wanted to save. Instead, she sat with the student. She said, "I see that you are struggling. I have resources if you want them. I will not give them to you unless you ask. This is not because I do not care. This is because I care too much to take your agency away." The student did not ask for resources that day, or the next. 3 weeks later, the student showed up at Patricia's office. "I am ready," she said. "Help me." That is ethical growth engineering. Patience, presence, permission. The student grew because she chose to grow, not because Patricia forced her. The difference is the difference between liberation and colonization. The right not to grow. The most important limit in this book is also the simplest. You have the right not to grow. You have the right to stay exactly where you are. To cope rather than transform. To survive rather than thrive. To focus on getting through the day rather than building a better future. These are not failures. These are choices. They are legitimate choices. They deserve respect. The growth movement has become coercive. It tells you that you must grow, that you are wasting your suffering if you do not turn it into strength, that you are somehow less than if you choose stability over transformation. This is toxic. This is not growth. This is a new form of should. You do not have to grow from your trauma. You can simply live with it. You can build a life that is good enough. You can find moments of peace without finding meaning. You can be happy without being stronger. These are not second-place outcomes. They are valid outcomes. They are enough. If someone tells you otherwise, they are selling something. Maybe a book, maybe a program, maybe their own need to believe that suffering has a purpose. That need is theirs to manage. It is not yours to fulfill. Elena, the graphic designer, eventually stopped growing. Not because she could not grow, because she did not want to. She had rebuilt her life. She had a new relationship. She had a new career. She was happy enough. She was stable. She decided that was sufficient. She stopped therapy. She stopped the daily practices. She stopped trying to become a stronger version of herself. She just lived. I checked in with her 2 years later. She was still happy. She was still stable. She was not stronger than she had been. She was the same. That was fine. That was her choice. It was the right choice for her. Growth is not a moral obligation. It is an option. Options can be declined. The danger of toxic positivity. The frameworks in this book are powerful. Power can be abused. The most common abuse is toxic positivity. The belief that any negative emotion can and should be reappraised, that any adversity can and should be turned into growth, that suffering is always optional. This is false. Suffering is not always optional. Pain is real. Grief is real. Rage is real. Despair is real. These are not cognitive distortions. They are appropriate responses to real events. Trying to reappraise them away is not engineering. It is denial. Denial does not lead to growth. Denial leads to dissociation. Dissociation leads to collapse. The antidote to toxic positivity is validation. Before you reappraise, you validate. Of course you feel this way. Anyone would. This feeling makes sense. It is not a problem to be solved. It is a signal to be heard. Validation first, reappraisal second. Never skip validation. Validation is the ground. Reappraisal is the flower. Flowers without ground die. Tessa, the rock climber, was destroyed by toxic positivity. Well-meaning people told her to look on the bright side, to be grateful she was alive, to see her injury as an opportunity. She internalized these messages. She believed that her failure to feel grateful was a moral failure. She spent 2 years trying to reappraise her way out of grief. It did not work. It made her worse. What worked was the opposite. What worked was someone finally saying, "You do not have to be grateful. You do not have to find meaning. You lost something irreplaceable. That loss deserves grief. You can stay in that grief for as long as you need." That permission was the beginning of her real growth. Not forced growth, real growth, slow growth, honest growth. The limits of engineering. The final limit is philosophical. Engineering assumes that systems can be designed, controlled, and optimized. Human beings are not fully designable. They are not fully controllable. They are not fully optimizable. We are messy. We are contradictory. We change in ways we did not choose. We stay the same in ways we desperately want to change. The engineering metaphor is useful. It is not complete. It is a lens, not a reality. When the lens stops helping, put it down. Sometimes the right response to suffering is not a framework. It is a friend. It is a walk. It is a good meal. It is a night of sleep. It is a day of doing nothing. It is a cry. It is a scream. It is a prayer. These are not failures of engineering. These are recognitions that engineering has limits. The limits are not problems to be solved. They are facts to be respected. A good engineer knows when to stop engineering, when to put down the tools, when to simply be with what is. Frank, the mechanic, knew this. He had a sign in his garage. It said, "Sometimes the car just needs to sit." That was his engineering philosophy. He fixed what could be fixed. He accepted what could not. He did not try to repair the irreparable. He did not shame a car for being old. He worked with reality, not against it. That is why he was the best mechanic in his town. That is also why he stayed sober for 22 years. He knew the difference between what could be engineered and what could not. The permission to stop. This book has given you frameworks, protocols, and practices. It has shown you what is possible. It has invited you to grow. Now it gives you something else. Permission to stop. You can stop reading this book at any time. You can stop applying its frameworks at any time. You can stop trying to grow at any time. You do not need permission from me, but I am giving it anyway, explicitly, unconditionally. You are allowed to stop. Stopping is not failure. Stopping is data. The data says that this approach is not right for you right now. Maybe it will be right later. Maybe it will never be right. Either outcome is fine. Either outcome is acceptable. You are not being judged. You are not being graded. You are just living your life. Your life belongs to you, not to me, not to this book, not to the idea of growth. If you stop, I hope you take one thing with you, not a framework, not a protocol, a question. The question that started all of this, the question that Daniel answered when he decided to teach, the question that Elena answered when she painted furniture, the question that Marcus answered when he paused instead of punching. The question is this: what do I actually want? Not what you should want, not what you were told to want, not what would impress other people. What do you actually want? The answer might be growth, it might be rest, it might be something else entirely. Whatever the answer is, it is yours. That is enough. The end that is not an end. This is the last page of the last chapter, but endings are not real. They are conveniences. They are where the author stops writing, not where the reader stops living. You will close this book. You will put it on a shelf. You will forget most of what you read. That is fine. That is how reading works. What remains will be what was already yours. A question, a permission, a sense that growth is possible even if you do not choose it. a sense that not growing is also possible, even if the world tells you otherwise. Daniel continued teaching. He now trains first responders across 3 states. He still has the creases. The movie is still in his head. He does not try to erase it. He uses it. He stands in front of rooms full of firefighters and says, "I have been where you are. I did not become stronger by bouncing back. I became stronger by building forward. You can too, not because you have to, because you get to." Elena married again, not quickly, not without fear. She married a man who does not make her smaller. She still paints furniture. She still meets her growth pod for coffee on Saturdays. She does not need to grow anymore. She is where she wants to be. That is not stagnation. That is arrival. Marcus became a sponsor. He has 3 sponsees now. He tells them about the notebook he threw against the wall. He tells them about the 60-second pause. He tells them about the stacked belief that saved his relationship. He does not pretend to have all the answers. He just shows up. That is enough. Tessa still swims. She still uses a cane. She never climbed again. She made peace with that. Not through growth, through acceptance. She does not call it post-traumatic growth. She calls it post-traumatic living. That is a different thing. It is also a real thing. It is also enough. You will find your own version of enough. It may look like growth. It may look like acceptance. It may look like something no one has named yet. Whatever it looks like, it is yours. You built it. Not from nothing, from something, from adversity, from suffering, from the raw materials of a life that did not go as planned. That is the engineering, not the frameworks, not the protocols, the choice to build or the choice not to build. Either choice made consciously is a kind of freedom. That freedom is the real destination. Everything else is just the path.